The man tells her to never try to leave him because she broke him from the inside and thought that she could escape calmly, and he asks her about it. However, the girl assures his lordship that this is not the case. The man objects and insists that she should call him by his name, then touches her hair. The main character saw that beneath his black locks of hair his red eyes shone so brightly that it seemed they were about to engulf her, and this made her unable to help. And the sharp howl of the wind seemed to begin to move away, creating the feeling that in this place there was no one left in the whole world, only the two of them remained. The girl saw that he like a hungry beast approached her face with his lips, and she suddenly felt a sharp pain from which she screamed loudly. The main character, while reading the book, thought that this author's writing skills were simply incredible because his strong arm wrapped around her waist, and she realized that she had been waiting for this moment for a very long time. Suddenly, a maid entered the room and addressed her mistress, announcing that a guest from the imperial palace had arrived. Upon hearing this, the girl was surprised and then quickly closed her book. The young lady was a little upset because at such an important moment she could not read what happened next, and then went to meet the guest. The red-haired girl reveals her name as Clitzia. She lives on the quiet and peaceful Shumarin estate and is the only daughter of the Viscount of Meggerino. The main character is the founder of the Northern Duchy Research Center at Shumarin Academy, and in other words, she is a fan of novels featuring the Duke of the North, and as dear fans have already guessed, her main hobby is reading these novels, especially those specializing in studying the profile of the Duke, and her dream is to marry the Duke of the North. Thus, every day of the main character passes very peacefully and richly, because she dreamed that her honeymoon should definitely be in Florida. The maid informs the mistress that they are already there, and then asks why someone from the imperial palace suddenly came to her because she hopes that nothing serious has happened. The main character says that she has never been to the capital, let alone the palace, and assumes that this is probably a visit to her father. Suddenly, the girl saw a guy with blonde hair and a charming smile. The stranger said she was just as she had been described to him. The man says that His Majesty the Emperor has demanded a divorce from her. The young lady is surprised to hear this and explains that she's never even met His Highness. The girl does not understand what kind of divorce we are talking about and asks about it because she does not understand anything. Viscount Isaac Meggerino explains that the temple registered the marriage by mistake. The little girl, surprised, asks if she is now officially married to His Majesty. The gentleman asserts that this is indeed the case, and that according to the divorce procedure provided for by imperial law after the divorce, the former empress must spend 10 years in seclusion. The man claims that this is in order to completely lose political power. Therefore, the current Viscount Meggerino was ordered to come to the island of Likai. The stranger reports that this means she will not be able to return to the mainland for 10 years, but in return His Majesty has offered worthy compensation, promising vast lands, wealth, and an estate. Hearing this, the main character became very angry and screamed, asking if they were seriously making fun of her because she understood that they had made a mistake. At this time, the father grabbed the girl and hugged her so that she would not beat this messenger. The guest says he's taking his leave and quickly leaves. The assistant asks Sir Ryan if that's enough. He replies that they've done everything they were supposed to. The father asks his daughter if she has finally calmed down, and she claims that this is too absurd even for the imperial family. The gentleman agrees with the girl, and she asks if he himself isn't angry at this attitude towards them, since he knows that it shouldn't be like this. The Viscount claims that they cannot disobey the imperial decree, and for this he believes that it would be better to submit and not resist. The main character's father was a commoner knight. 10 years ago, he fought in the war and became a hero, receiving the title of Viscount and the Shumarin estate and its lands. The protagonist understands that he is not interested in noble feuds. After all, her father is a truly loyal subject of his people and is ready to give his life for the empire. Clitzia does not understand the point of obeying such an absurd order, because she considers it to be no different from participating in the actions of a traitor exiled for 10 years. The young lady reflects on the fact that she also has her own plans for life, because she must marry the Duke of the North and live happily. The little one understands that being bound by human rules is simply terrible. The bird insists that she shouldn't lose heart because she belongs to the great bonds that control the flow of the world. The main character asks how many years he has been talking this nonsense because he thinks that it doesn't matter now. The bird explains that she is now talking about great universities, and the young lady says that this is not appropriate because she will not sacrifice herself like her father. Clitzia says that she will create a commotion in the temple and force them to correct the situation, and if nothing works out, then she will also look into the imperial palace because she believes that she must personally see the face of the man called her husband. Having heard this, the bird evaporated as it realized that these bonds had finally begun to work and that it somehow felt better and therefore it could rest. The main character changed into a boy's clothes and then quickly left the castle in the hope of getting to the stables and being unnoticed. Suddenly, the little girl saw her father and was surprised, and he asked if she was heading to the capital because he didn't understand why she was looking like that. And at such a late hour, the Viscount claims that the Emperor's order is the duty of a nobleman and the honor of a knight, and if she really wants to go, then first she must defeat his red lion Shumarin. The father raised his sword but suddenly fell and then said that his daughter had already mastered the fire rune at an advanced level and that this was enough to resist her old father. A servant informs the Viscount that Lady Clitzia has crossed the main gate and asks whether he should send a pursuit. The gentleman says no, as he believes they have done everything possible to prevent her escape. The Viscount claims that the time has come for her to be able to make decisions personally because she understands that with her genes, she should not live under the constant guardianship and decrees of her elders because she must try herself in real trials. The main character arrived at the gates of the city of Muta, which was a paradise for travelers and the largest trading city of the empire. Since this is the only route from the south to the capital, not only all the merchants of the continent but also countless travelers, mercenaries, ordinary workers, and bandits arrived there. So this place is always overflowing with people and money, and of course various affairs were going on there and not always truly good ones. The little girl was very happy that she had finally arrived, but she understood that she had overdone it when she decided to cover a 2-week distance in 3 days because she had been galloping with all her might without any breaks. But suddenly, the horse gets tired, and the little girl asks her to get ready because she understands that people cannot find out that she is a hybrid horse since they will take her for an ordinary traveler. At this time, the horse thought that the owner had completely lost her conscience and then asked if she planned to continue feeding her pathetic pieces of dried beef. Clitzia asked the animal to be patient for at least a week, because when they reached the capital he would eat whatever he wanted. The horse considered this animal cruelty. The little girl understands that her poor horse, who always has a hard time with separation, is probably tired and very hungry, and then she leaves. The main character saw a hotel and asked if there was a room with food because she was very hungry. The men who were sitting at the next table were surprised because they doubted whether it was really a man since he was kind of skinny. At this time, the little girl pounced on the food and thought that she was very hungry and remembered her father's words that if she left home she would have a hard time. The girl looked at the large piece of meat and thought about leaving a little bit for Shukrima, but she realized that it was too risky because they could get caught. Shukrim is a hybrid horse, and its genus belongs to the most ancient creatures obtained from a mixture of a dragon and a horse. In other words, it can be attributed to the sacred animals. This incredibly intelligent carnivore is so resilient that it can travel across an entire continent in a week, eating little and working hard. Of course, their value is indescribable, because such animals are difficult to find outside the imperial family, and the main character understands that she was lucky to pick it up on the road. The little girl remembers that when she was a child she bumped into him on the street, right in the middle of a battlefield, and asked if he wanted to eat this dried meat. However, the horse refused and said that even if she was of the same bloodlines, he would not fall for any peace because he had his own rules. Clitzia mounted her horse and was overjoyed. The war with the Servan Empire had lasted 10 years and she had grown as it advanced. The main character's father often took her with him to the recent battlefields, and when she turned 10 years old it finally ended, and that was her childhood. The little girl thought that now that she had decided to enjoy her youth, she was being told to spend another 10 years in exile, and therefore she would very much like the emperor to be an accommodating person. Muta is the largest trading city of the Furza Empire, and there are those who rule it, and in some aspects they are even more powerful than the imperial family and influential in the temple itself. The joint stock company is Tom Holdings Corporation, and there's no place in Muta where Tom's hands haven't reached from children's candy to black market money. This huge company dominates the Furd's empire, and it is surprising that it is in the hands of one young guy who is doing a good job and running the business. The founder of Toma Holdings. Toma Ryukin is a handsome man with black hair and a cold gaze. He is of noble birth and therefore very intelligent. When the man saw the horse, he wondered where it came from. The servant explained that it had been left behind by a guest at the inn. Tom and couldn't understand what was wrong. Then, surprised, he asked if the guest was from a noble family. The worker apologizes and explains that he is only a groom and does not know the details, but he understands that since he is staying at this hotel, he is most likely a commoner. Ryukin orders him to find out everything about this guest. The servant inquires as to why the master suddenly wants to know every little detail about this horse. The sir explains that if he wants to conduct business wisely, he needs to be more discerning since he sees that this is not an ordinary horse, but a hybrid. Hearing this, the worker doesn't understand where some commoner got such a horse from and thinks that this is not a simple situation that he needs to resolve. The gentleman explains that their guest most likely has reasons to hide his identity and suggests that this could be an attempt by the emperor to send his man to them. The main character lay down on the bed and immediately fell asleep. And at that time, the men entered her room and were surprised when they saw her because she looked more like an escaped noblewoman. The guy says that nothing worth stealing can escape the legendary Knight brothers. However, in reality, they're petty thieves. The thief asks his brother if he remembers how much wild mushroom powder was in her dish, because he understands that it is enough to knock out a herd of elephants and she might not wake up quickly. The robber understands that they can easily take all her things, but suddenly he saw the jewel and realized that she was from a noble family. The brother thinks that they were lucky because he was afraid that he would run into a poor man again, but as it turns out, they have been very lucky with luck for a long time. The robbers saw the sword and thought that it looked like some kind of antique that was very expensive. Suddenly the man felt pain from the blow and then screaming asked when this girl managed to wake up because he understood that she should still be sleeping. The main character pushed the man to the floor and then pressed his neck with her hand and angrily asked how they dare disturb Krita and her good night. The little girl turns to the thieves and asks them to tell only the truth and then asks if they tried to steal her precious Krita. The robbers insist that this is not true at all because they don't even know what kind of Krita it is, and they are just thieves who wanted to get a few coins. Klitsia asks if they want to say that they were a couple of thieves wandering around the area and completely by chance chose her room. The men insist that this is true and that they were only hoping to make a little money off of young and inexperienced travelers for their own good. The thief says that they usually put sleeping pills in the visitors' food beforehand, and by the way, they are quite famous in these parts, because they are the legends of the Muda brothers of the night. The robber claims that they are capable of stealing anything and anywhere, and this is their working motto because they have a lot of experience and have never had any failed cases. The little girl asks if they use sleeping pills because she understands that this substance is very expensive, and not everyone can buy or get it. The man explains that few people know this, but wild mushroom powder works great as a sleeping pill, but they are confused as to why it didn't work on her. Klitsia reports that wild mushrooms have no effect on her hearing. This the robbers were surprised, as this was the first time such a case had happened to them. The Red Lion of Shumarin Knight Isaac Mejerino was in the nightly squad along with Klitsia's named uncles and aunts and did well. Among them was a young warrior who had earned a reputation as a master of medicine and a wise woman. Klitsia called her Aunt Lance and respected her greatly. Lance made an invaluable contribution during the fighting when medical supplies were scarce. She also bravely participated in every battle. The problem was that Lance had become overly attached to little Klisia. Through a delicate approach to dosing dangerous substances, Lance was able to develop a strong immunity to poisons in Klisia. The main character reports that practically no poisons affect her because she was simply tired from the road and therefore quickly passed out. The robbers don't understand how this is possible because not only did she beat two grown men like they were children, but poison doesn't work on her either, and they wondered if she was really human. The little girl says she should turn them over to the city guard. Hearing this, the thieves beg her to have mercy on them this time. The men insist that they will no longer engage in theft or other activities, as hunger and despair drove them to this dirty act. The robber says that their mother is seriously ill and they are having a hard time finding money for medicine, and then begs the girl not to do this. Suddenly, the main character heard a question from a man standing behind the door. Is everything okay with her? Because a strange noise was coming from her room. Clitzia turns to the thieves and tells them to take the money and get lost because they only have 10 seconds to do all this, and therefore they must make it in time. Hearing this, the boys surprised ask if she's letting them go. The little girl replies that while they may be thieves, it doesn't look like they managed to hurt or kill anyone. The girl suggests that this is their chance to get off the slippery slope and then orders them to be sure to spend this money on their mother's medicine. The thief looked at the lady in surprise and said she was a red witch. Hearing this, the girl thought it seemed she had been hasty in deciding to let them go. The robber falls to his knees and asks for forgiveness because he misspoke, and then takes the bag of coins and thanks her for her mercy and says that they are leaving now. The men jumped out the window and screamed, saying that she was a fool who simply believed this nonsense because they had never seen their parents in their lives and therefore assumed that they would be better at deceiving people than robbing them. The thief thought that for a second it seemed to him that he met the Red Witch again, and then asks his brother if they should really quit. At this time, the main character opened the door and assures the hotel director that she is fine because she was just trying to swat a bug, and he asks if there were any robbers. The girl thought that she didn't remember her mother at all, and thought that maybe that's why she gave in to her emotions, and then asked the director if he was in cahoots with them. Clitzia looked out the window and saw a thief who managed to escape, and assumed that it seemed that lawlessness reigned in this area, and there were many such robbers. The girl doesn't understand how she can travel when there are thieves and murderers all around, because she was not at all prepared for this, because she understands that it will be difficult for her. At this time, the servant reports to the master that this man looks to be about 18 years old and used gold coins from the central bank for payment. The assistant reports that they say that upon arrival, he was covered in dust and dirt like a homeless person, but the guest boldly approached the worker as if nothing had happened. The servant explains that he ate as if he had been hungry for a long time, and at the same time observed basic etiquette, and this attracted the attention of other visitors. The gentleman assumes that it looks like the young offspring of southern nobles, and the hybrid horse in the stable looked emaciated because he understands that to bring it to such a state, one would need to ride non-stop for at least 3 days. Rukin believes that it is logical to assume that her owner has traveled all this way from the depths of the southern lands of the empire, since this is probably his first time in the city. The gentleman says that since the young nobleman uses a hybrid for transportation and rushes to the capital in a hurry while hiding his identity, he most likely has an extremely urgent matter. At this time, an assistant enters the room and reports that he managed to carry out surveillance as he ordered, and besides him, the so-called Knight brothers were in the specified location. Hearing this, the Sir was surprised because he understood that these petty thieves had been operating in their city for several years and were carefully hiding. The assistant reports that he approached to help the young man in case of danger, but he easily overpowered the brothers, and moreover, if he understood correctly, he has immunity to any poisons. The man reports that as soon as the guest suspected his presence, he immediately retreated. Hearing this, the gentleman thought that it was impossible to say exactly which rune he was using, but it seemed they were dealing with the owner of the runes. Rukin asks Luke how things are with the imperial family, and if he's heard anything from the elders. The aide says there's no news yet, and Xena only sent some financial reports. The gentleman says that he increasingly suspects that this man is a spy for His Majesty, and then offers to arrange a meeting for them because everything should go as naturally as possible. 20 years ago, the continent of Ashi was consumed by the flames of imperial ambition. The imperial family, wielding the power to corrupt human consciousness, swept across many countries, leaving devastation and mountains of dead in their wake. And when the entire continent was on the brink of collapse, the Furzy Empire, led by the knight Isaac, successfully recaptured the vast southern lands. It was this event that earned him the title of Red Lion. This title served as the beginning of an even more bitter war between the two empires, and after 9 painful years of war at the Battle of the Carrion Fields, the situation turned upside down in an instant. thanks to one man who personally beheaded all members of the imperial family of Servan the military, and strategic genius of this young man, united the lands under his banner and ended the war. It was the 16-year-old crown prince of the Furza Empire, now the sole ruler of the 5 great dynasties of this continent, Jan Furza. Thus, the youngest emperor in history managed to stabilize the entire foreign policy situation of Jan Furza during his 10 years of reign. When the emperor learned that he was married, his subordinates tried to justify it by saying that the temple had made a mistake and the registration had been completed 3 years earlier. The assistant explains that therefore, according to official documents, he currently has a wife from a good family who is very beautiful and intelligent. His Majesty asks in surprise how they are reporting this to him only 3 years later, and then he suggests that they simply quietly correct everything so that no traces of this ridiculous mistake remain. The servant asks for forgiveness and explains that this is impossible since the marriage process is under the jurisdiction of the temple and the imperial palace has no right to interfere in their affairs. The assistant explains that this is the first time such a situation has arisen, and therefore this error is very difficult to correct, as it takes a lot of time. At this time, the great Emperor Jan Furza, the war hero and savior of the entire continent, reveals his true nature as a ruthless psychopath, mad dog and scoundrel in the absence of the general public. His Majesty says that he needs a meeting with the high priest and offers to organize it right now, and at that very moment, because he is furious. Imperial advisor Count Owen Miri, upon hearing this, prays to God that the temple immediately fixes everything as he understands that it will only get worse. The chief priest claims that this is impossible because this is what the rules say, and the birth document of a member of the imperial family, his education and everything else is always regulated by the temple. The priest claims that this unbreakable rule was introduced to prevent any possible shenanigans within the imperial palace, and for this reason, even the emperor is not able to change their contents. His Majesty believes that this is not a simple matter of editing documents, but rather a mistake by the temple that must be corrected immediately. The chief priest claims that this is only his assertion, but according to temple records, the marriage registration was filed and signed 3 years ago, and the period during which this document can be corrected is 1 year. The priest explains that after this time, all records are blessed and sealed. After all, no matter what their reason, from now on, even His Majesty is no longer entitled to have them. The priest reports that since the events are very important, the document was blessed 3 times, so doing the opposite will not work. Jan wonders what would happen if they invited all the people involved to testify, and whether this could affect the document's legitimacy. The high priest asks how they know that the legal wife is not under pressure from the emperor's changing tastes. Hearing this, His Majesty asks if he realizes what he is accusing him of, and if he understands the bitchiness of these words, which are very important to him. When the count saw that the master was using the rune, he screamed and asked him to recall it, because it was a sacred temple. The priest approaches the emperor and informs him that he is the most influential and powerful man in their entire empire, and therefore the laws must be applied most strictly when it comes to him directly. The high priest of this temple firmly declares that His Majesty's marriage will not be annulled because it is impossible and not within his power. Hearing this, the emperor became very angry and thought that maybe he should just burn them, and thought that his people would get used to the new religion. After talking with the high priest, His Majesty believes that these Cretans have completely lost their minds since they dared to seal the records of the emperor's marriage without even warning him. Several years ago, an assistant informed His Majesty that he had accumulated a lot of paperwork. The emperor suggested that his assistant handle this work, as he believed that it was not for nothing that he had hired him for this position. Owen says in surprise that he has no right to sign them himself, because he believes that such papers as, for example, budget allocation, require his attention. The assistant believes that the emperor needs to see some documents in person, and only in this way, and not otherwise, because it is important. After the battle with the criminals, Ian says that these idiots think they can finish him off, and then asks his assistant what he said about the documents. Owen explains that, for example, he has papers from the temple that he must look at himself because this is enshrined in law. His Majesty suggested simply putting them aside and not sending them. Upon hearing this, The aide, surprised, said that it could be very important, and in an emergency, he should do so. The emperor looked at the servant and reiterated his refusal to send them. The man explained that most of them were financial donations and didn't understand how many he could allow to pass. Jan suggests he decide for himself, but his assistant explains that this could lead to problems as he understands the importance of these documents. At this time, Owen assumes that maybe this ridiculous mistake happened then, which became a problem after so many years, and now he is paying for it. Hearing this, His Majesty grabbed his assistant by the shirt and claimed that he should have prevented all potential problems then. The man explains that he tried his best to draw his attention to those documents, but at that time the emperor did not want to hear him. At this time, the count enters the room and asks not to torment his brother, as he considers it impossible that they will not find a way out of this situation. The man believes that they are not actually a married couple and asks if this is true, and then says that divorce is the only solution now. Owen says that all the records will remain in the documents, but practically no one has the right to view them, and therefore this is a good option for the palace. His Majesty asks who this woman is, and the assistant explains that she is a noblewoman from the provincial lands who is the eldest daughter of Viscount Megerino Lady Clytia. Hearing this, the emperor realized she was the very daughter of the Red Lion. An aide reported that she was now 21 years old and had no known problems. His Majesty suggests forgetting about divorce since a very young lady will be branded as a divorced woman, and asks if this is the case, and besides, a divorce from the emperor means living in de facto exile for 10 whole years. Hearing this, the assistant was surprised because His Majesty the Emperor was worried about someone other than himself, and he was seeing this for the first time. The man turns to His Majesty and informs him that this divorce will only bring benefits to Lady Clytia, as she will receive all the benefits of being a former empress. The assistant reports that the lady will receive a huge payment with the new possessions, and believes that for the Viscount's daughter this is a real gift of fate. However, John claims that the fact remains that they risk ruining the young lady's future, and then asks if there are other options. His Majesty asks how they feel about the national mourning plan. His aides are surprised, insisting that now is not the time for such jokes. The emperor says that if none of the options are suitable, he asks why they don't just marry her, since he believes that perhaps this is the very fate. His Majesty turns to the brothers and suggests that they go out for a while with the help of his rune, since they are irritating him, and this makes him tired and nervous. In the Furza Empire, the first is the summoning of magic using minerals, so-called mana stones, which operate through complex rituals and calculations. The second runic magic relies on natural forces by accumulating them in the body of the magician, and in their lands magic is widespread and used for routine needs. This magic is quite accessible thanks to the availability of mana stones. However, rune magic requires physiological abilities and is not within everyone's grasp. In other words, a person must have a natural gift. In the Furz Empire, there are people with outstanding martial and magical skills. They are called rune knights. The assistant, observing his master, thinks that he is, again, smashing everything around him, and at the same time does not pay attention to what is happening around him. The wind rune is also known as the power of the flow. It is most effective for combat, which is why most rune knights, including Sir Ryan, chose the wind rune. In contrast, the ice rune is also known as the frost rune, and is considered much less effective in battle, but it is also strong and powerful. The man turns to his brother and says that if he overdoes it with the wind rune, then they need to break the distance. The emperor has control over all 5 elemental runes, which is one of the reasons why he is the sole ruler of the 5 great dynasties of the continent. The man believes that it seems he did not give his only younger brother enough discipline lessons, as he should have spent more time raising him, and therefore asks for forgiveness for this. The gentleman offers to thank him for his gentle treatment. Then he suggests going to the Megerino estate and informing them of the divorce in person. The assistant was surprised to hear this, knowing that Chamarin was a 2-week ride away. He, the captain of the palace guard, wondered if the master really wanted to send him there. Thus, 2 weeks later, the assistant found himself at the Megerino estate on an important visit, and in the hope of understanding and resolving this issue. My brother is very gentle when it comes to Isaac Megerino. After all, when this former commoner brazenly refused the emperor's offer to command his troops instead of punishing him, John granted Isaac a noble title and personal estates. The assistant thought that he would have to put pressure on them using this fact, but he considered that this was not necessary and decided not to use this trump card. The man thought that this was an ordinary backwater estate with an old retired knight and his ill-bred daughter, and therefore thought that there was no need to worry. Sir Ryan Furza, the only brother of the current ruler, renounced his noble life to become the emperor's swordsman, and through his own efforts achieved the rank of captain of the elite imperial palace guard. However, the man did not yet know that a poorly educated girl from a backwater estate was capable of creating such a commotion in the empire. The assistant reports on a young man named Sasha Lin because he understands that they need to resolve this issue urgently and asks what he will be ordered to do. This is Tom's secretary Luke saying that the boss ordered everything to be organized as naturally as possible, and also wondering what's with this idea about a hybrid horse. The assistant explains that the owner said he was leaving tomorrow and only asked for the horse to be given water since hybrids only eat meat, and it would not be difficult for them to reveal this fact. Luke heard this and was happy because he understands that this is wonderful and they will take advantage of this chance and hopes that everything will go well. The main character looked and did not understand what was happening because her horse had caused a riot in the butcher shop and she had no idea about it. At this time, people do not understand how a horse can eat meat and think that it is some kind of monster since they see such a thing for the first time, and this even scares them. The city's residents were surprised because someone's mad horse had created chaos, and the merchants and guards could do nothing but just watch in fear. Klitzia quietly asks the horse to explain to her what is going on here, and how she came up with the idea of causing such a disturbance in front of the whole city. Shukrim asks the hostess to wait because this is a misunderstanding because he was suddenly seized by a terrible hunger and he could not control himself, and this is completely explainable. The little girl took a piece of meat from the horse's mouth and asked if he was tired of living. The animal asked for another piece, believing it was wrong to throw food out of the mouth of someone who was eating. However, the main character resolutely tells him to let go quickly before she chops him into horse meat and orders him to listen to his mistress because things are bad. The gentleman turns to the girl and asks if she is the owner of this horse. Meanwhile, she thinks that now there will be no end to the problems. The little girl explains that she is truly sorry because her horse usually doesn't cause any problems, and this is not like her at all. The main character claims that this incident was a real shock for her since they had planned to leave Muti that morning. Hearing this, the man thought that everything was working out, and how the boss had assumed this was all an unusual traveler because anyone else in his place would have begged for forgiveness in tears and on his knees. The gentleman understood that this stranger was suspiciously calm, and the food saturated with a substance to stimulate appetite was even more effective than he thought. The secretary knew that this monster had broken through 3 buildings to get to the food, but if that hadn't happened, they wouldn't have been able to organize everything in such a miraculous way. The main character asks what kind of compensation they want because she assumes that he owns this counter. However, the man objects and explains that it is owned by their subordinate, and they are now at the headquarters of Tom's company, and the meat counter that was destroyed is managed by their man. The gentleman says that they will therefore take on the legal process themselves, since he assumes that the young man will not be able to handle it, because he does not have such an education. The young lady enthusiastically says that she heard about their company and thinks that everything will go easier than he thought, and therefore agrees. The little girl understands that her horse has made a mess in the big shot store, and she has no choice but to agree because she knows it is her fault. Meanwhile, the man is thinking about how the guy remains calm even after hearing Toma's name, and therefore thinks that he is becoming more and more suspicious. Luke explains that since the losses are quite significant, he has no right to deal with them personally, and therefore declines on this point since he has a lot to do. Klitzia, alone in the room, thinks about how she can't even imagine how much he will ask for and what compensation he will want, and that this will not help her. The man greeted the dear guest and then said that he was informed that his horse had caused a bit of a mess and that he was surprised by this. When the main character saw this guy, she thought that with his dark hair, red eyes, and jet black suit, maybe he was the Duke of the North. The little girl doesn't understand how he knows because he's a genius entrepreneur with a gilded hand, and at this time he solves such issues on his own. Despite his lowly origins, Tom now has more capital than many high-ranking nobles and is good at this business. However, the girl understands that this is not his real identity and assumes that he is Eugene Weiner de Servan, the last scion of the imperial family. This guy is the leader of a rebel force seeking to revive their empire. After all, he once held the title of Duke and ruled over vast northern territories. The gentleman looks at this guy and thinks that he is more suitable for a girl and even hides his gender, and therefore he became interested because, judging by the way she holds the cup, she is clearly the daughter of a noble family. Tom understands that it is much more important that she knows about his origins and then asks for forgiveness and asks if she could clarify what the Duke of the North means and what she meant by that. The man thought that depending on her answer he would decide whether to finish off this girl right here and now. The main character realized that she had completely forgotten herself for a second because he so perfectly personified the Northern Duke that she accidentally blurted it out. The man asks if she just called him the Duke of the North, and the little girl tells him to forget it because it was a slip of the tongue that she said out loud. The girl suggests not to talk about it and then asks what will happen with the compensation and what his conditions are for this time. The gentleman thought that she was trying to change the subject so awkwardly and wanted to fool him that he could hardly contain his laughter. Clitzia asked how much she owed him. Tom suggested they calculate it right then and there instead of putting it off until later. When the little girl saw the bill in his hand, she was surprised and asked where he got it from, because she couldn't even imagine that he was prepared to meet her. Tom says that it is necessary to calculate the costs of repairing 3 buildings' compensation for future losses and for moral damages to the store owner. The gentleman says that the cost of all the destroyed goods includes waste disposal fees, taxes, and compensation for the tree belonging to 2 street vendors. The man reports that the final cost is 50,000 rubles. However, the poorly maintained stable is also partly to blame, so they are willing to cover 10% of the total costs. The main character, surprised by this, says it's a tidy sum and then asks what she can do about it. At that moment, she thought about how much money she could buy a dozen houses with. The girl understands that the Muta shopping center is located near the capital, and therefore the prices are high, and in addition, business expenses have also significantly inflated the price tag. Clitzia is thinking about the fact that a trust fund established by her father was opened in her name, and if she withdraws money from it, he will be informed. The girl understands that since her father is most likely looking for her now, he will probably personally come to Mutu and therefore assumes that Daddy will somehow sort this out. At this time, the guy looked at the girl and thought that it was very strange because she probably realized that this was a fabulous sum, and yet she so easily agreed to pay it off. The gentleman muses that it would be logical to finally stop pretending to be a commoner since he doesn't understand why she's wasting her time on it. However, he suspects that perhaps she's simply testing him. The guy is thinking that he can't understand whether she's pretending to be a fool or whether she really is because it's hard for him to read what's on her mind. The main character says she doesn't have that kind of money on her and therefore needs to withdraw the sum from the Imperial Bank. She asks if she can go there. Tom says that she won't find a suitable bank in Muta, and so she'll have to go to the capital, and therefore he thinks it's very risky to give her a few days to travel. The gentleman says she'll have to leave a deposit. The little girl was surprised to hear this as she had nothing on her and she said so. The man tells her that her horse is a hybrid and asks if that is true, then claims that it will do just fine. Hearing this, the main character was surprised because she did not understand how he knew this, but suddenly she realized that Shukran had broken several buildings and was eating meat in front of the crowd. Clitzia understands that now he will understand that she is not a commoner and then quietly says that he could of course leave the horse to Mute, but does not know how she can get to another city. Tom says he has personal business in the capital and asks why they don't go together. The little girl says that would be great. When the secretary heard that his master was going to go to the capital with that young man, or rather girl, he asked in surprise if he was sure about it. Luke reports that there has been no noise from the Emperor lately and suggests that this could very well be a trap. Tom says that he knows the most effective way to look into a person's soul and believes that all you need to do is keep talking to him, no matter how smart he is at negotiating and deceiving. The man understands that over time, even the most sophisticated tricksters can reveal all their secrets, and their plans become obvious regardless of what they are hiding. The gentleman says that the journey to the capital will take all day, and he believes that he will leisurely discover all of its secrets. The next day, the carriage was speeding toward the capital. Sitting in the carriage, the little girl reflected on the awkward situation and thought it would probably be strange to act friendly when the blame lay with her. The girl considers that she should start with a light compliment and then says that he really does look like the Northern Duke. Hearing this, the man was confused because he didn't understand what it meant and assumed that she was testing him again. Tom claims that unfortunately he is poorly informed about the northern lands and is just an ordinary businessman, but at that time he thought that he should behave naturally because he needs to observe her reaction. The little girl asks if he knows about the Grand Duke of the North, and he doesn't understand what's wrong with her, and then asks if she means the title that the ruler of the northern lands receives. The gentleman thought that she wanted to draw him into a brutal psychological battle, and therefore he would have to turn on his brains, which were planning to rest. The main character adjusted her cap and said that in just one day she would tell him everything he needed to know. Eugene would later bitterly regret this. The girl asks the first question, and the gist of it is that his beloved slipped and fell in the hallway and wants to know what he should do. Option A is to kill the architect who designed the corridor. Option B is to kill the servant responsible for cleaning, and option C is to kill the shoe designer. The gentleman asks why innocent people are being pumped because he doesn't understand what this has to do with the title of Duke. The little girl insists this is wrong and then asks a second question. She says his girlfriend has insomnia and asks what he should do. Answer options. A. Kill the furniture maker who installed the bed. B. Kill the maid who didn't keep an eye on her insomnia and lover. C. Kill the tailor who made her pajamas. Tom doesn't understand why someone has to kill someone else and thinks that this is a personality disorder test and asks if that's true. Clitzia screams and says that this is wrong because she thinks that he is doing a terrible job so far, and then asks a third question. The little girl says that the emperor is sending his beloved to war, where she will inevitably die, and asks what his actions will be. The guy replies that if this is the emperor's order, then he is obliged to obey, and then asks what we are talking about here, because it is obvious. The girl claims that this is wrong, and then screaming claims that he does not look like the Duke of the North at all because he could have given the correct answer. Hearing this, the gentleman thought that in fact he is the real Duke, but he understands that he cannot say this yet, although he would really like to. Clitzia reports that it has been known since ancient times that a duke must be strong, cold-blooded, handsome, and mysterious, and she knows a lot more. The girl insists that it's more important that he be great in bed. Hearing this, the guy doesn't understand what's wrong with this woman, and then asks to change the subject. The gentleman suggests they talk about the purpose of her visit, for example, or about that horse. However, the little girl insists there's no way to avoid it, and says he should consider himself very lucky. The girl claims he won't be able to find a more knowledgeable expert in the study of northern novels. Eugene will remember those 24 hours spent on the road for the rest of his life. The time had come for the young lords to arrive in the capital of the Sigrid Empire. The main character was surprised to see many tall buildings. The girl asks the gentleman if he could drop her off here, and at that time he thought that he was finally saved from this insidious milady. The little girl explains that she just needs to withdraw money and buy her horseback and Muda with it, and then thanks him for giving her a ride because he really helped her out. The gentleman was the first to get out of the carriage. He stopped and then thought and decided to do the right thing, and then offered his hand and asked if he could help my lady. The main character looked at this guy and thought that his image was too good, and then said that even considering his appearance, she cannot count him passing the exam. The girl says that she can only give him 60 points and that this is the maximum, because she believes that he can surrender as the Northern Duke only when he gets 90 points. The little girl says that she will then gladly allow herself to be kidnapped, and the boy asks why he would kidnap Milady. She thanks the Grand Duke. Let's hear this secretary was surprised that this girl said the word Duke and thought that the gentleman revealed his true identity, and now he was just letting her go. Luke asks whether to send a spy after her or set up surveillance, but the gentleman objects and suggests leaving everything as is since there is nothing to worry about for now. After the destruction of his homeland, Mr. Eugene was obsessed with only the idea of taking revenge on the Furt's empire, and was not particularly interested in anything else because everything else was a trifle. And Tom cared nothing but this goal. He was now the last member of the imperial family to fall in love. The man suggested they head straight to the office. However, the secretary thought that the gentleman shouldn't let that woman go like that. Tom reflected on how he'd been afraid the whole way there that he was about to go crazy. The gentleman had the feeling her knowledge of the Northern Duke was useless as she continued her story even at night. He couldn't understand where such a frail body could get so much energy. Eugene doesn't understand why she's so preoccupied with the Duke's image. However, he knows he should stop dwelling on such trivialities as they could drive him crazy. He believes this girl is a witch who wanted to bewitch him. At this time, the main character thought that she did not even notice the moment when this guy began to address her as a lady, and reflects on the fact that it seems she got too carried away in the conversation and accidentally revealed that she is a girl. Clitzia saw the building and thought that in any case she needed to go to this temple because the one who could say that registering the marriage was a banal mistake. The girl realizes she simply needs to calmly explain the situation to them and resolve the issue. She explains that the Clydia of Shumarin demands an audience with the high priest. However, no one opens the door and the little girl does not understand what is going on because she knows that the temple is supposed to receive parishioners around the clock, and then she starts knocking on the door and screaming loudly. The young lady asks if they have fallen asleep there or if they have gone on vacation, and then screaming orders the door to be opened for her since she has come a long way for this. Suddenly, the boy opens the door and apologizes, then says that the free food distribution is taking place in the building in front of the square, not here. The little girl explains to the respected priest that she is not actually a vagabond, and that her name is Clitzia Megerino, and she is the daughter of Viscount Isaac, and therefore asks to be allowed to meet with the high priest. However, the boy drove her away and the girl left. Meanwhile, the high priest, observing this, orders his subordinate that if she comes again, he should try to send her away. The priest asks why the high priest won't let her into the temple. He explains that it's because she needs to meet someone else first. The boy thought that now he felt somehow awkward in front of her, and this made him sad because he was not used to lying to someone, and that day he made a mistake. At this time, the main character thought that she was dying of hunger because she had been so busy chatting with the Northern Duke that she had completely forgotten to eat on the road. The little girl thinks that first she should get money from the bank, and tomorrow again demand a meeting with the high priest, and if they don't let her in, she will simply break down the door. The girl thinks that since her identity has already been revealed, she can calmly withdraw money and buy an expensive room for the night. When the main character saw the bank door, she realized it was closed on weekends and holidays. She was a little upset as she hadn't expected such a surprise. Suddenly, the young lady remembered the priest's words about the distribution of free food being held in the building in front of the square, because she decides to go there and get free food. Clitzia thinks that she is a little ashamed to take something that is intended for tramps, but right now she looks the part. The girl saw a sign on the door that food distribution had ended today and advised her to come between 4 and 4 p.m. She realized she was 15 minutes late. The main character sat down on the floor and thought about what kind of trouble she had gotten herself into because she understood that she shouldn't have given all the money to those thieves, since now she was alone in the capital without a single penny in her pocket and without even shukrim. The little girl knew she'd have to survive there for 2 whole days, but the only thing that made her happy was that her darling and Krita were still with her, and then she suddenly realized she'd disappeared somewhere. At this time, the Duke looked at the sword and assumed that this weapon was very valuable to that girl, and she forgot it in a hurry. The main character believes that he is a fake Duke of the North who dared to do this because she assumes that he initially wanted to intoxicate her with his charming face and physique. At this point, an aide objects to His Majesty. Yang asserts that as emperor, he simply wants to look at his people and asks, "What's wrong with that?" Miri says that if he's recognized on the street, it causes quite a stir. The gentleman says that's why he'll dress in something inconspicuous. The assistant claims that nothing will work anyway because his appearance is too recognizable, and then asks who else in the entire empire could have such bright hair. Miri asks his lordship if he has any idea how much trouble the guards will have with each of his walks. The assistant screams and asks to refrain from his secret inspections and offers to organize an official tour of the capital with all the appropriate measures. Clarence, a member of the palace guard, addresses His Majesty and says, "Count Miri's concerns are well-founded." The lady shows the bottle and asks how about this, because these pills can change the color of his hair for about a day without any side effects. His Majesty took the pills. Clarence explains that if he uses the rune, the effect will immediately wear off, so she suggests he keep that in mind. When the Emperor looked in the mirror, he saw brown hair and thought it was very convenient, and his assistant said that with such an appearance, problems could be avoided. Yan quickly exits the window and tells the guards not to know anything about this. Miri wondered when His Majesty would start following official procedures. Clarence believes it's high time he got used to his character. The Count says he's never heard of such drugs before. The lady asks if he has forgotten what people call her, and then says that she is a genius of modern medicine. The woman explains that the original purpose of these pills was to prevent hair loss, but they ended up with a drug with an unusual side effect. 10 years have passed since the end of the war. Furza is flourishing and developing as if it had never existed, but now problems of a different nature have arisen. The Emperor, while walking through the city, saw a door with signs announcing it as a free food distribution center. He wondered if there were so many hungry people in his city that such a place had to be opened. Jan recalls that a lot of time has passed since the decree on state aid was issued, and he doesn't know what these damn officials are doing. The Emperor wondered if he was being too soft with them, and therefore believed that as soon as he returned, he would immediately order Miri to convene them. At this point, the main character touches the Emperor and has no idea who he is. She says that unfortunately the building is already closed for today. The little girl informs him that they work even on weekends, so he needs to wait until tomorrow. She wanted to reassure him. Hearing this, Ian thought that she was a woman in men's clothing, but what was more important was her energy, and he knew that without a doubt, this girl was the owner of an advanced level fire rune. His Majesty understands that in the entire empire, there are not even 10 strong owners of the fire rune, and one stands before her in the form of a vagabond, and he became interested in who she is. The Emperor understands that he will have to find out for himself, and then says that he is glad to meet her, and asks if she would like to work for him. Hearing this, the little girl thought that he was not a tramp, because he was very attractive in appearance, and for some reason she had the feeling that she had already seen this man before. The girl looked closely at the man and remembered that her type is black-haired dukes with red eyes, while bright hair and green eyes are the features of minor characters. The stranger says he could provide her with food. Hearing this, the little girl bows her head and says she'll gladly take on the job. Klitzia insists she'll work as long as there's meat on the menu. The man wondered why the girl was so excited to hear about food and was surprised. The Emperor announces that he is Private Detective Ray Vogue. Hearing this, the girl realizes he is lying, and then extends her hand to him and says that she is Sasha Lin. The little girl asks what she should do now. The man asks if she sees the man and points at him, then says he's suspected of cheating on his official wife. The Emperor tells her to follow him and find evidence. The young lady declares herself ready and then quickly follows the man. At this time, His Majesty looked at the girl's trail and thought that the red-haired owner of the fire rune strongly reminded him of himself, watching the man. His Majesty screamed and said that it seemed he had noticed them, and the girl smiled and said that the target was at a dead end. Yan doesn't understand why he suddenly started running away, but at that time the girl really wanted to catch up with him, and therefore used the wind rune. Klitzia took the gentleman in her arms and offered him to hold her tightly. After a few minutes, they moved. The Emperor says that she is an excellent employee, and at that time he thought that since this person owns the rune, it means that he is not a small fish, and therefore now he has no right to let it go. The little girl reports that the man ran into the building and assumes that he is meeting his lover there, but does not understand why he chose such a place. His Majesty saw 4 bronze 7s and realized that this was the Lucky Box, which is an underground auction house. The gentleman understands that no matter how complex the client's order is, they are capable of obtaining almost anything. However, since absolutely all goods are put up for auction, customers are forced to wait until their desired item is drawn. Even so, with a 99% success rate, they became the most successful underground guild in the entire empire. The Duke asks the man what happened, and he explains that he had to shed his tail on the way here. The director asks which tail he is talking about and also asks if he is speaking for one of their best employees. The man assures that he has no need to worry because he successfully broke away from them, and what is more important is that he was able to get it, and puts the bag on the table and then announces that they hit the jackpot. The stranger reports that he has something that can finish off His Majesty the Emperor. At this point, the main character asks if he's asking her not to interfere. Jan looked at the little girl and realized she was an advanced user of the fire rune and physically strong. His Majesty understands that her assistance could be useful, but believes that the best solution would be not to involve outsiders in these matters. The gentleman says that it is dangerous and therefore suggests that she go back and forget what she saw today because she has had enough of these big risks. Clitzia says that since it is dangerous there, she believes that he should not go alone, and then says that he would like to go there himself, since he, a sophisticated detective, should not be exposed to such danger. Jan touches the girl and says that the next time they meet he will definitely treat her, then strokes her hair and asks her to leave him. The host addresses the ladies and gentlemen and announces that they are pleased to welcome them to today's auction. The Emperor, sitting in the hall, thought that for such a renowned gang they had terrible security because he got here too easily, and he also took the mask and the place from the poor fellow. The presenter offers to present them with a list of goods and then announces that he has a breakthrough: win an incredibly rare creature straight from a noble family. And this is an adult hybrid horse. The man reports that he has a sand-tear slave from the mystical desert lands, and he is a beautiful young man who has a very unique appearance. The presenter asks if he is directly connected to His Majesty, and then says that the last lot is the death of the Empire, and wonders if the very name of this lot does not excite the mind. At this time, the main character, while on the street, thought that today she would be able to eat a hearty meal, and suddenly remembered that the man was very light. The little girl understands that he can't even use the rune, and the Emperor hides his energy perfectly and doesn't understand what will happen if he falls into the hands of villains who want to harm him. The presenter announces that they have a winner, and the gusts of wind leave. For big money, the price is even higher than he expected, and assumes that the biggest fish of the criminal world have gathered there. At this time, the Emperor thought that in this situation it would be better to contact the palace guard rather than try to resolve everything alone. The little girl asks in surprise if this is an auction. Jan looks at her in surprise and asks what Sasha is doing here. The young lady explains that he was worried about him and decided to sneak in. The Emperor, surprised, asks how she was allowed in looking so suspicious. The girl explains that the guards are surprisingly useless, and then says in surprise that he didn't expect to see something like that in such an inconspicuous building. The little girl understands that from the outside it resembled some kind of barn, and the gentleman heard this and thought that she was completely stupid. The presenter announces that they are moving on to the next lot, and this is a beautiful young man, Sand Tyr, born in the harsh lands on the edge of their continent, with eyes more reminiscent of rubies. The man explains that his skin is smooth and dark and his hair is the color of the blue sky, and then asks if this is not a beautiful sight, and says that the starting price is 100,000 rubles. The main character heard this and didn't understand what they had been fighting for all these damn years, and then turned to the detective and screamed, telling him to forgive her because there was something more important to do now, and ran away. Clitzia used magic to get onto the wall and then screamed and said that the slave trade was prohibited in their empire. The host addresses the guests and offers his deepest apologies for this misunderstanding, and then turns to the security and orders them to remove him from here immediately. The main character turns to the boy and then unties his hands and says that she will save him and offers to just stay close. The boy asks what she is doing and then screams and tells her not to interfere and to get out of here. The young lady looked at him and said that he was so small and had already learned to be rude, and then suggested that they get out of there and picked him up. At this time, the Emperor watches her and thinks that it would be better to listen to this boy first, but he understands that it hardly matters. The gentleman understands that these scumbags have several rune owners with them and are very proud of this, but at the same time they forget that each magician also has his own limits. When it comes to the owners of the fire rune, it is difficult to imagine anything more destructive, because everything around is changing and not for the better. The main character sitting in a safe place says that it looks like he overdid it because the lack of practice clearly shows, but she still took the boy. The boy screams, begging to be let go right now, and the lady, surprised, asks if he's awake yet. The kid asks how they dare interfere in his affairs, wondering if he'll ever forgive them. The boy turns to the red-haired man and claims he's especially at fault. The main character touches his head and suggests he at least start by thanking him. Klitzia says that pointing your finger at people is very impolite, and then pats the boy on the head again. Suddenly, strangers appeared, and His Majesty says that he understood the situation since they have been watching them for quite a long time, and therefore suggests that they do not hide. The main character, surprised, asks who these people are, and Jan turns to them and tells them to leave. The strangers take the boy and leave. The little girl wonders who these people were and who the boy is. He explains that mirror is another form of magic similar to runes but slightly different. The girl enthusiastically says that the detective is well read. Jan thought that he needed to solve this problem first. His Majesty advises her to lie low for a while as he believes the auction house's people will be trying to track her down. However, the main character did not take his words seriously, and she noticed that he left so quickly and did not even say goodbye, but she assumes that he can take care of himself since he looks so frail. Suddenly, the little girl felt hungry and remembered that he had promised to treat her, and then screaming, she said that the detective should buy her food. At this time, the servants tell Mr. Seth and claim that it was dangerous because he believes that his operation was too risky, and if the Sultan finds out about it, he will be furious. The boy says that if those two idiots hadn't shown up, everything would have gone according to plan, because he believes that the easiest way to find his brother is to join a nobleman's family under the guise of a slave. Seda asks his servants if they have found out who these people are. The man explains that the man with the bright brown hair is the emperor of the Furza Empire. Hearing this, the young gentleman asks in surprise if they are sure of this, since he understands that he is not at all like him. The servant explains that they have not yet figured out how and why the emperor hid under someone else's appearance, but the energy gave him away. Seda immediately understood why the aura seemed familiar to him, and then says that now that even the emperor is aware of what is happening, they should return immediately. The boy suddenly remembered he'd been distracted and hadn't even noticed how his pain had suddenly subsided. Then he asked who the other person accompanying him was. The servant asks for forgiveness because they were unable to establish the identity, and they only found out that it was a woman hiding under the guise of a man. The young gentleman looked at the mare and realized that she seemed to have stabilized. The servant reminded him that they needed to hurry as they didn't have much time. The young man remembered that this girl called herself Sasha, and he became interested in how soon they would meet again because he would like to see her again. At this time, the emperor turns to his servants and asks what a bunch of idiots are doing around the clock and how they allowed a slave auction to take place right in his capital. The emperor summoned his officials in the middle of the night and didn't even wait until dawn. He claims he doesn't need excuses since he's tasked them with overseeing the city's welfare. Ian asks if they're planning to destroy him. The assistant objects claiming that's not the case, as Sir Ryan told them that fish won't swim in excessively clean water. His Majesty inquires whether they followed Ryan's orders and is also curious about his whereabouts. The servant explains that as captain of the guard, he is most likely at the scene. At this point, a soldier turns to the captain and says they've cleared almost all the rubble and fortunately no civilians were injured. The captain considers them extremely lucky. The knight informs the captain that they have already arrested all the suspects, and regarding the item that destroyed the empire, those interrogated say that it was not sold. The captain carefully reads the report and says that everything is fine, and suggests that they forget about it since there is nothing to find fault with. At that time, Tom thought that he had spread rumors in various places, and anyone who had a nose for money had probably heard them. The gentleman and therefore believed that everything would go according to plan since he had thought everything through well and there should be no obstacles, and now all he had to do was wait. Servan Empire was destroyed long ago, but their descendants were not completely exterminated and now roam the lands of Furza. After some time, they prepared to carry out their plan of revenge and approached it very quietly and at the same time insidiously. The captain, walking down the street, thought about what expression his brother would have on his face when he found out about all this, and whether his thoughts would change. At this time, in a secret office in the capital of the empire, Tom met with his assistant who said that the people of Xena had begun to act decisively, and they intended to strike at the emperor himself. Hearing this, the gentleman was surprised and crying out asked what the hell was going on and why they hadn't consulted him, their leader first. The man explained that according to the elders, they weren't satisfied with his plan. The assistant explains that this is all because the preparations have been too drawn out, and it seems they have acquired some kind of trump card, and now they can't wait to use it to finish off the emperor. The elders declared that their leader would be pleasantly surprised as early as tomorrow night. Hearing this, the gentleman thought they were a bunch of impatient old men. Tom announces that he has no intention of keeping idiots as assistants who just get in the way, and then claims that his plan is flawless. The nobles and subjects of the Servan Empire who survived the war with Furza formed a secret organization called Xena and spread its roots throughout the continent, sinking their fangs and claws everywhere, hoping to one day restore their empire's former glory. The Duke thought he could understand their lack of restraint as the war had raged for many years. However, the gentleman understands that these people don't realize they survived it, only because they met Jan Furtz in person. After all, they can't even imagine what he's capable of. The Duke says that he'll take a look at their so-called trump card. Hearing this, the assistant, surprised, asks if he wants to make the move himself. The secretary thinks it's too dangerous and it's better to send their group there. He's genuinely worried about his master. The gentleman claims that he is not going to help them in any way, but even if they are idiots, they will certainly carefully prepare the scene. The Duke thinks that since they're in the capital, he doesn't see why they shouldn't watch everything from the front row. It would be interesting to see what they're capable of. Tom is interested in whether they will start tomorrow night because he needs to know, because he doesn't want to miss this event that has interested him. At this time, the main character thought that the supplies she had managed to get had disappeared in a second as soon as she turned away. The girl remembers that, as she was told, even among the homeless, all the places are assigned, and she cannot sleep wherever she wants because she might get hurt. The little girl didn't even expect that the capital would turn out to be such a cruel city, and therefore believes that all this happened to her because of these two bastards. Klitzia is sure that all this happened because of the emperor and his marriage, as well as the vile detective, and therefore she will never forgive them. Suddenly, the boy holding the bread touched the girl and asked if her brother was new. She said something like that, then apologized and asked if she'd taken his place. The young man gave the girl some bread and said it was for her. She looked at him in surprise and asked, "How could he? He must be hungry too." The boy explains that he was given food at the cafeteria and will be able to get more later. He would like to share it with those in need. The guy explains that this is free bread intended for the starving, and he thinks that this young man looked very exhausted and therefore decided that he needs it more. The main character thought that this capital was beautiful because it had food given to her by a boy she didn't know, because at that very moment, she was very hungry. Klitzia doesn't understand why there are so many homeless people on the streets and asks about it. After all, she thought this was a very rich city. The little boy, surprised, asks if he knew about it. The boy explains that the homeless and the poor deliberately flock here from different regions since the emperor is personally responsible for the well-being of the capital, and it is much easier to get help and support there. The guy says that some homeless people are even hired, and he is from Shumarin and lived in a small nearby village, but his parents abandoned him, and he miraculously managed to get to this city. The kid thinks no one cares about the people the way His Majesty the Emperor does, and he talks about it with delight. The lady says there are many poor people in Shumarin too. The girl asks if there are places without them and thinks he speaks like a nobleman brother. After all, there is deep meaning in his words. The boy says that His Majesty will soon put an end to all poverty in the empire, and he believes this because the emperor is just... The guy says that he respects His Majesty very much, but suddenly someone throws bread in his face and the gentleman asks his friend why he is throwing food around. The count asks if he sees that he decided to feed the homeless man because his appetite has disappeared from the nauseating stench, because he doesn't understand where all these rats come from. The gentleman says that he does not understand what the emperor is thinking about at all, since he believes that he could have cleansed their city long ago, and then smiled. The man looked at the boy and asked if he was angry, and also asked if he realized who he was baring his teeth at. Then he called the boy his brain. Within a few minutes, the gentleman, missing one tooth and with his head bandaged, screams and asks how he dared, and then asks the main character if he knows who his father is. At this time, the girl thought that the rules here are strict because the guards came running as soon as he hit someone once. The guards are talking among themselves about how this young man is a criminal and a scoundrel, and the young lady thought that at her home, everything could be resolved with a simple handshake. Clitzia reflects on how she could easily escape this situation by using a rune, but suddenly a guard shouts at her, telling him to stay where he is and not even try to escape. Within minutes, the guards had surrounded the girl and then pushed her to the floor. They don't understand how it happened. The young man simply fell. At this time, the main character thought that she could not stand it anymore because she just wanted to eat normal food and really hoped for it. The guard officer screams and says that the man he beat up is the youngest son of a high-ranking official, not to mention that street fights are strictly prohibited. The young woman sits quietly and listens to all this, but thinks about how loudly he's yelling, which irritates her. The man insists that she shouldn't ignore him. The officer asks her to state her name, age, and where she's from, and asks why she's in the capital. The girl thinks she needs to calm down and just tell the truth. Clitzia reports that she is the daughter of a viscount from Shumarin who has come to the capital to meet with the high priest and his majesty. The officer was surprised to hear this and then asked if she had an ID. The little girl said she had lost it. The gentleman reports that the defendant was convicted of armed robbery since his name, age, and occupation are unknown, and believes that he probably entered the capital illegally. The main character was locked behind bars with other robbers. Guards believed she showed signs of psychological instability and delusions, and could therefore pose a danger to society. The officer believes that there is no need for further investigation and therefore pronounced a verdict of 3 months imprisonment because he believes that this would be an appropriate reprimand. A man who had been behind bars asks a young woman if this is her first time in prison. She screams and explains that she was unjustly imprisoned, but rather that she is partly to blame. The girl insists it's not all her fault because even though she punched a dumbass, once she still thinks he brought it on himself. She says it was self-defense because that's pure outrage. The stranger calmed the girl down and said that everyone says that, and therefore suggests that she calm down because he believes that everything is as it should be. Late that night, the man who had been imprisoned escaped with the help of runes. His assistants gave him a cloak and told him everything was ready, as the operation to eliminate the emperor was beginning immediately. Xena's silver bandits have gathered, and their leader says that when taken in the right dose, wild mushroom powder works perfectly, and he thinks it's a good thing they collected the right amount. The assistant reports that the antidote is also working, and that the moon is much brighter than usual today, so he hopes that this will not worsen the camouflage. The man claims that this is a perfect night to kill the emperor, and that a more suitable day will not appear in the near future. The main character doesn't understand the fashion for sleeping pills because she's tired of waiting for them to leave and decided that in the presence of all these suspicious people, it would be better to pretend to be asleep. Clitzia reflects on how, having overheard their conversations, she thinks it's too serious to simply ignore. After all, they were talking about an operation to eliminate him. The little girl thought that she needed to find the officer on duty and report everything to him. She went out through the open door and realized that she was on the inside of the palace. The girl doesn't understand why there aren't any guards there and considers it irresponsible. Then she tied her hair and realized she'd have to deal with someone else's problems again. At this point, Ryan turns to his brother. The gentleman, upon seeing him, screams and calls him a little bastard and then asks what kind of mess he's caused in the city. His Majesty claims that if even one slave was sold at auction, he will kill them. Ryan asks him not to get so worked up as there's a more pressing matter at hand. The fair-haired man tells the emperor that he needs to go out into the garden immediately because there is a present waiting for him there and he has tried very hard. Jan asks if he's up to something stupid again, and the assistant smiles and says that he has at least a little bit of trust left in him and therefore promises that he won't be disappointed. A man in a black cloak asks his comrade if he finds it suspicious, since this place should be full of guards, but they somehow got in too easily and still haven't met a single guard. The leader suggests that he think for himself, since they work for Xena, and therefore assumes that the elders probably made sure that nothing would interfere with their operations. The bandits saw His Majesty and hid in the bushes. Meanwhile, the Emperor couldn't understand what he was supposed to see here. Suddenly, His Majesty was surrounded by bandits, and at that time Ian thought that Ryan was a bastard who dared to use him as bait. The group began attacking the Emperor, and he defended himself with his rune. Jan asks if this magic-suppressing technology and similar ones are quite expensive. The robber says that everything is correct because a huge amount of money was spent on it, and the magic of the Furza Knights is truly impressive. But because he relies entirely on his runes, he can be easily suppressed by such devices, and it's only a question of power. In the end, the Emperor himself fell victim to such a simple trick. Jan claims they probably don't know anything since rune knights don't rely on outside sources of mana. His Majesty reports that this is because they are extremely ineffective and easily destroyed, as it is only necessary to apply more force. The robbers claim it's nonsense that his own pride was his undoing and then they attack him. Jan wonders if they really thought that was enough. At this time, the Duke tells his assistant that they have already arrived at the palace, but he is very surprised because he did not see any guards, of which there should be many. When Furza finally defeated Servan and became the absolute power of the entire Ashi continent, the secret organization Xena inherited the defeated empire's goal. There was practically no industry they couldn't reach. From bribes to the black market to gambling, they stopped at nothing to raise money. This group secretly trained professional mercenaries who were supposed to work for them and carry out all their orders, and also give their lives in their name at any time. Suddenly, the Duke heard the cry of the elder who was wondering how much longer they were going to drag it out, since he believed that the Emperor should have done it long ago. But the man interrupts him and suggests that they be patient, as he believes that rushing things is too risky for them. The Duke reflects that after 10 years of fruitless waiting, their leaders have begun to turn into impatient old men with clouded minds. However, Xena remains the main driving force behind their revenge. Tom quickly left thinking they were old idiots, and that his own brother had betrayed the Emperor. Ryan Bartier is a stupid slacker who was lucky to be born into a good family, and Tom thinks that they are stupid idiots, because it is difficult to find a person more devoted to Ian than Ryan. At this time, the Emperor used his mana and in a few minutes killed all the bandits who tried to harm him. Ryan, seeing this, screams and turns to His Majesty asking if he's okay. Ian asks if this is all they could prepare and calls them worthless. Clarence asks in surprise what is going on here, and then reports that all the guards were suddenly gathered and ordered to wait inside, and then an intrusion alarm sounded. The Emperor explains that it's nothing special. His brother simply decided to give him a gift. The lady asks why no one warned them. His Majesty reports that he did not finish off anyone and therefore asks to take away those people who were lying unconscious on the floor. Clarence says she'll do everything she can to get the information out of them. Ryan says he's surprised the garden is still intact. His Majesty explains that his mother loved this garden very much, and therefore if it were any other place there would be devastation all around, and that is why he was attentive. Well, since the Emperor's mother valued this garden, he deliberately used only the water rune so as not to break anything, because this garden was dear to him. The Emperor understands that even the most experienced masters find it difficult to control their energy so precisely, since only a few can do it. Jan believes that this was a real surgical operation that only one person in the entire empire was capable of performing, and that was him. Ian turns to the lady and asks her to transfer Ryan here as well and to do it immediately. The assistant, surprised, asks the woman where she thinks he'll be found now. Clarence says that she doesn't know, but assumes that he is probably hiding from the Emperor again because he doesn't want to catch his eye. At this time, His Majesty reflects on the fact that the more he thinks, the more he admires his own genius, since he managed to force Xena's rats out of their basements with such ease. Suddenly, Ian saw a girl with red hair, and he became curious about how she got here, and then he used his rune to approach her, and at that time, he thought that he should not panic. The man asks what her number is and then says that if she wants to run away, then she should go in the other direction because the palace is on the other side, and that's where she will definitely be caught. His Majesty asks if she wants to be accused of a serious crime. The little girl, surprised, wonders what's going on in the palace. When the gentleman heard this question, he was surprised and then apologized because he would hardly be able to tell her about it, and then smiled silently. The little girl insists that all she needs is to know that the emperor is okay. Yang asks why she's interested in that, and she replies that caring for His Majesty is everyone's duty. The young lady claims that after all they all live in the same empire. The gentleman agrees and says she's right. The man then tells her that she doesn't have to worry because the emperor is completely fine, and he knows it for sure, and therefore there is no need to worry about it. Hearing this, the little girl thanked him and quickly left. Jan watched her go and remembered that he had said the palace was on the other side, so thinking that this girl was just a runaway meant there was no point in worrying. The emperor thinks this little girl is quite unusual, knowing how rare it is to meet the owner of the fire rune. He knows she wasn't even nervous when she met him. His Majesty understands that the girl's manner of speech was like that of a soldier, but what is more important is that he cannot shake the feeling that they have met somewhere. Suddenly the man remembered the girl and realized that it was Lady Clesia, and he became interested in what the hell she was doing here and how she got to this place. At this time, the main character thought that this was a good opportunity to meet the emperor in person because she had to ask him all the accumulated questions and at the same time ask him to drop the accusations against her. The girl thought that finally she would at least look at the face of her husband who used her without her consent. The Duke orders the guards to make sure that not a single mouse escapes from the castle today and that not a single person leaves this palace. At this time, the young lady thought that during all this time she had not seen anyone, but suddenly she saw the silhouette of men in the distance and thought that her husband was there. His Majesty sensed something dangerous and used magic. A few minutes later, he says it looks like a rat just ran by, which is why he reacted that way. The assistant, surprised, says he can't cast magic so carelessly since the floor is ruined and he'll have to repair it. And so he begs the master to restrain himself from using magic at least occasionally. At that moment, a man in a black cloak with a mask over his mouth grabbed the main character and covered her mouth with his hand. She realized that this man was Tom Rukin. The Duke took off his mask and asked Milady what she was doing here. He also wondered why she was wearing this uniform, as it suggested that perhaps she had escaped from prison. Clesia claims that in fact she should be the one asking what he is doing here looking so suspicious, and calls him Director Tom. Hearing this, the man thought that at first this girl seemed simply strange to him, but now it is clear that this is an extremely unusual girl. The man reflects on the fact that he could have guessed from the start that she was an excellent fighter, and besides, hybrid horses are not just for everyone, but he does not understand why he just saved her. Tom asks the girl how many points he got today, and then reminds her that she said that you can only get a pass by getting 90 points. The man reminds her that she said that the Duke of the North must be strong, cold-blooded, mysterious, and beautiful, and then asks if that is true. The little girl thought that first she needed to get out of here, and then she said that he was the owner of 95 points. Luke turns to his master, then apologizes for blocking the line and explains that he was trying to catch up with them. When the Duke looked at him, he realized the baby had disappeared. At this time, His Majesty is thinking that the girl with red hair is Lady Clesia, who recognized the man in the mask, but it does not seem that they are well acquainted. The Emperor recalls that 10 years ago, immediately after the end of the war, Eugene, who had black hair and red eyes, was a descendant of Servan and was his peer. Then Ryan asked Ian if he thought they'd ever see him again. The Emperor said he swore he'd find him himself and it was only a matter of time. His Majesty says that this man has matured quite well, and the assistant asks in surprise who he is talking about. Ian asks his brother if he'll explain what the hell he did to his palace. Ryan explains that they've been trying to track down Xena's men roaming the Empire for a long time, but they've always eluded him. The assistant explains that for them it was a thorn in one place, but he was able to convince them that he had betrayed the Empire and met in person. Ryan explains that he orchestrated everything so that they themselves would fall into their trap by giving them false weak points and vulnerabilities. While all their elite fighters were sent on an operation, he infiltrated the headquarters and wrecked everything. The man explains that this is how he managed to exterminate those rats. Ian asks if this means it all happened because of him, since all the hitmen came to the garden. Ryan looks a little embarrassed and says he feels like he deserves the praise. At this time, the main character wonders if they can be tracked outside the castle and then turns to the director and says that he passed the exam for the Northern Duke. Tom, hearing this, asks him to stop as he already wants to go underground. The little girl says she believes he had his own reasons for breaking into the castle and that all suspicions have been removed for now. The Duke thinks she's been rather quick to turn a blind eye to this, but he knows he probably shouldn't have said that. The young lady believes that if he were a bad man, he would hardly have saved her. Hearing this, the man thought that she had said everything correctly, because initially he could have not saved her or finished her off at the very moment when she began to suspect, and it would have been much easier. Tom doesn't understand why he's acting so strangely around this woman. Clemente turns to him and asks if he's even listening to her since she forgot her sword with him. The Duke says that he kept it until her arrival, but first suggests finding her a better outfit that would not attract attention. The man looked out the window and said it looked like the capital was busy today. His assistant agreed and said that, as expected, Ryan's information was false. Luke says Xena headquarters is currently under attack. Homar is Eugene's main partner. His family was the financial backing for the creation of Tom's corporation. At one time, the Rukin family managed the secret funds of the Servan Empire. All financial affairs of the empire were carried out through these people, and they were second only to the emperor. Hamar says it's hard to believe Xena would so easily let such a man get close to her. Hamar is one of Xena's supporters, and his goal doesn't necessarily involve reviving the Servan Empire. The purpose of Tom Rurikan's support of the rebel forces is that one day he will revive Servana and become its ruler and make the Furt's empire pay. Tom wants revenge on Jan because he considers him a damned bastard and wants to rip out his heart with his own hands. The Duke says that unfortunately he is not particularly smart in either politics or military affairs. He is only an entrepreneur who knows how to handle money. The gentleman believes that the most important quality of any entrepreneur is the ability to see the value and potential of each person. Homar turned to Tom Eugene and said that from that day on, he recognized him as the sole heir to their empire and would invest his time and money not in the empire, but in His Highness. In other words, Homar Rurikan did not rely on Servan's objections, but on the potential of one single person, Eugene. The gentleman said that he intended to personally observe what was happening and hoped that he would not get into trouble because he believed that Eugene was not one of those who would be so easy to catch and therefore wanted everything to be in order. The servant announces that the young master has returned and another lady is with him. The Duke is surprised to hear this, not understanding what it means. The servant explains that he is accompanied by a girl in a prison uniform. The assistant, surprised, asks if her hair is red by chance. The servant says it is, and the master ordered a bath prepared for her and some clean clothes. Gerda screams and asks how this should be understood, since she reminds him that he swore that he did not intend to be distracted from his main goal. Luke suggests that perhaps Mr. Eugene is already at the age to find a companion for himself, and then asks if this is not critical, since a young man is still allowed to experience a little romance. At this time, Tom reflects on the fact that in the end he had to bring her here, because he understands that people might misunderstand him, but he couldn't leave her on the street. The gentleman thought that as soon as he returned the sword to her he could break this strange connection, and then he looked at the weapon and thought that it was very old. The guy understands that the sword was well looked after, but time is merciless, and therefore he could assume that it is already over 100 years old. Tom reflects on the fact that everything clearly indicates that the blade is far from ordinary and could be patched and modified, but he believes that this weapon could turn out to be a real treasure. The Duke doesn't understand how she could so casually forget him. At that moment, a girl enters the room and tells the director that she's finished. Tom thought that in the end this sword was not even suitable for him, and then looked at the baby and was surprised by her beauty. Klitzia says that a warm bath is the best thing humanity has ever invented, and then thanks the director. He doesn't understand why this girl has suddenly changed so much. The man gives the lady a sword and tells her she left it behind. The young lady thanks him, and he informs her that since the item is now in its owner's possession, she can return. The Duke said that since it was midnight, he would give her a guest room for the night. She thanked him and said it was very kind of him. The main character asks if he could spare some time for her tomorrow because it is very important to her. The next day, Clitzia took her ID from the thieves and happily said that all she had to do was withdraw the money and she would finally be able to redeem the bail. Hearing this, the Duke thought that in fact this whole story with the debt was just a pretext to determine her identity, but he understands that simply refusing the money is now too suspicious. Tom understands that there is nothing to be done now and can only take the money and forget about this misunderstanding, since he thinks that it is unlikely to be a burden for her since she is a noblewoman. But Eugene didn't yet know that the bank he thought was the end of all this chaos would reveal an unexpected truth. The main character assures the bank teller that there's clearly some kind of mistake and asks him to check again. The worker claims that she checked several times and there is no person named Clitzia listed among their clients, Mejerino. The main character claims she even has her ID with her. The worker explains that she's already double-checked several times, and only Isaac Mejerino is listed as the Mejerino family member. The little girl insists her name is definitely on the list, but the woman asks for a minute because she needs to check other families. Hearing this, the Count thought that if she wasn't on the list, she was becoming even more suspicious. The worker reports that Clitzia Mejerino de Ferza from the imperial family. Upon hearing this, the girl thought it was some kind of nonsense, since she knew for a fact that only 2 brothers survived from the entire family. However, the main character assumes that theoretically this is only possible if she is the Empress, and suggests that perhaps this is again an error in the documents. At this point, the Duke couldn't understand why Clitzia wasn't correcting the worker, believing it couldn't be true. The woman then invited the young lady to follow her. Sitting in the bank's VIP lounge, Sigrid, the little girl, asks if she's allowed to be there. Madame Sigrid, the bank director, asks her not to worry as she couldn't keep the young lady waiting in the main hall. The director wondered if the young lady was surprised since they had special treatment and terms of cooperation for members of the imperial family. Madame reported that frankly speaking they didn't even know they had a new empress. Hearing this, the little girl thought she was just as perplexed as this woman. Clitzia does not understand why she is listed as the emperor's wife and does not know whether this information can be disclosed, since she assumes that perhaps it was a state secret. The young lady reflects on the fact that no one warned her that this was a secret, and she does not understand why the emperor has not yet corrected all the documents. The headmistress looked at the girl and thought that perhaps this was secret information, and she should not ask her about it, and then said that my lady was not obliged to explain anything to her. The woman informs her that, unfortunately, withdrawals from her bank account are currently impossible. Upon hearing this, the girl, surprised, asks why. The director explains that the depositor has calculated it for 20 years in advance. In other words, she will be able to withdraw money from the account, either when she turns 30 years old. The woman says she can have the consent of her trustee Isaac Mejerino, and he also added that under no circumstances should the rules regarding withdrawals be violated. Hearing this, the protagonist remembered her father telling her he trusted her completely. He then explained that she urgently needed cash. Milady wonders if there are any other options. The headmistress says that in that case, she has the right to withdraw money from his legal spouse's account. Clydia asks if she means the emperor, and the woman asks if they are married. The girl doesn't understand whether the empress has the right to withdraw state funds without the ruler's knowledge. The woman explains that she has the right to do this only if it concerns the state budget, but the emperor's personal account is always accessible to his wife. The headmistress explains that, moreover, His Majesty's property is very large, so if she urgently needs money, she asks if she knows that the family code recognizes joint property after marriage. Madam reports that according to a government contract, the bank allows the couple to manage this property, and if she wishes to withdraw money, they are ready to provide it right now from His Majesty's account. Hearing this, the main character was surprised and thought that if this is so, then they themselves started this whole mess, and the error arose due to the palace's miscalculation. The little girl understands that, moreover, they still haven't bothered to file for divorce, but she understands that by withdrawing the money, she is essentially agreeing to compensation. Clitzia doesn't understand whether living in exile for 10 years is worth it. Meanwhile, the Duke, standing outside the door, reflects on his inability to believe what awaits her. Tom remembers that the girl said that the Duke must be good in bed, and therefore understands that with each new meeting, she seems more and more strange and unusual. The man reflects on the fact that there are many suspicious moments hidden behind her eccentricity, and every time he begins to think that he has understood her, something inexplicable happens again. The Duke understands that this girl manages to surprise him every time. But suddenly the door opens and a young lady comes out, then apologizes for being late as she needed to get a card. When the gentleman saw the black card in her hands, he realized that it was a premium card from Sigrid Bank, intended exclusively for the most distinguished clients. The black card can be used in almost any area, and it is said that in the entire Forze Empire there are not even 10 of them. Clitzia tells the director that they have to go as there's still some business left. Hearing this, the bank's director was surprised as the young lady had called the man the director. The woman thought that he was undoubtedly a man whose fortune was comparable to the budget of a small country, the director of the corporation Tom Ruriken. The head of the bank does not understand why such important people came to them at once, and therefore he thinks that today was a very lucky day. The aide looked at His Majesty and thought that he was furious again, and that this month had set a record. The Emperor didn't understand how the application had been rejected and what he was talking about. Ian can't understand how they could reject him and throws the paper in his assistant's face. Owen explains that the problem is that for several generations there hasn't been a single recorded case of divorce in the imperial family. Miri reports that they recently discovered that the law requires the Emperor and Empress to be present in person to consent to a divorce. The Count says that after this, the certificate is sealed in a magical artifact. Hearing this, His Majesty doesn't understand why they came up with all these ridiculous rules and asks about it. Owen believes they were introduced to prevent the Emperor from abusing his power. Ian suggests simply bringing Lady Clitia. An aide informs His Majesty that an ambassador has arrived for the Megerino family and reports that the Viscount's daughter is missing. Hearing this, the Emperor cries out and orders her to be found. His Majesty thought that she ran away to avoid exile, and therefore believes that this girl took things to extremes, and he no longer cares that she is the daughter of that man. Ian remembers the red hair and the girl he recently met. He realized that Sir Isaac used fire magic in battle, and the girl also used this rune. The Emperor says that they need data to begin searching for his wife, and then asks Ryan if he has been to the Megerino estate. Ryan reports that she has red hair, almond-shaped eyes, a slightly round face, a naive expression, and is wearing a prison uniform. Jan says this is a direct order from the Emperor, and therefore asks him to refrain from joking. However, the aide insists he's not joking and simply skipped the uniform part. The Emperor asks his aide why he hasn't left for the Viscount's estate yet. He explains that he hasn't had time to prepare as His Majesty gave the order only a couple of hours ago. The gentleman crying out says he's leaving immediately. Owen asks the Count if he's going to Isaac's and if he can join him. Miri, surprised, asks Ryan if he wants to go with him too. He explains that he has personal business in Schumarin. Owen says he has no reason to refuse. The secretary says that it is necessary to hand over the leaflets as quickly as possible because this is an extremely urgent matter, and then reminds Count Miri that they are in a hurry and asks if he remembers about this. The assistant informs him that he's leaving everything to Sir Hans and asks him not to let him down. He then informs him that invoices for work in the gym have arrived and he needs to review and approve them. The secretary suggests finishing the work with the leaflets and sending them to headquarters, then reminds them that this is a direct order from the Emperor and suggests not to delay and leaves. The assistant printed a wanted poster for a very important person and indicated that there would be a reward of 500,000 rubles for any information about this girl. At this time, the boy thought that today he was given 2 loaves of bread at once, and he understood that he could treat someone else. Suddenly, the guy was grabbed by the shirt by the gentleman who had thrown bread at him last time and claimed that he had caught a rat. The boy asks if he's the same gentleman who was beaten up last time. The man asks if he remembers him and then says he'll catch the red-haired bastard somehow. The gentleman hit the boy, claiming he would pay for his humiliation. The boy felt pain and screamed, then begged to be saved. A red-haired girl suddenly appeared and quickly dealt with the attacker. She says that if he had ended up in her area, she would have broken his legs. Clitzia says that this idiot should consider himself extremely lucky. The master's assistant, surprised, says that they weren't warned that this boy was protected by the nobility. The boy thanked his lady for saving him, and she, surprised, asks if he remembers her and then reminds him that it was he who shared his bread with her. The young man asks in surprise if she is the older brother. The lady smiles and asks why he is so surprised. At this time, the Duke thought that at first he was waiting for the miss to fill out the card, and now he was dragging after her down the street and did not understand why he was doing this. The boy asks if he should call her Mistress. The young lady smiles and suggests simply calling her sister, as she believes nothing has changed. Clitzia gave the boy a bag of money and said that this was more than enough to get to Shumarin, and then showed that there was also a letter there. The girl says he'll be allowed into any establishment with it, and later she'll be able to hire him to work on their estate. The guy, surprised, asks why she's doing this. The main character strokes the boy's head and says that she understands that life was not easy for him in his native land, and then apologizes for sending him back to Shumarin. The young lady claims that this is the only place where she can help him, and then asks him to wait for her there and asks if he understands. The Duke, surprised, says she's very kind to this boy and asks if she knew him before Milady explains that she simply repaid him with bread. The gentleman was surprised and then said that despite her high-born position, it was clear from the very first meeting that she was very different from ordinary aristocrats. Tom says it's the first time he's met a noblewoman skilled in martial arts. The little girl explains that she's been at the front a lot since childhood. The main character says that she probably didn't notice class inequality because of her irresponsibility, because her title blinded her to the difficulties that ordinary people go through. The girl claims that thanks to this same title, she can now at least somehow help them. She suddenly apologized as she felt she'd gone on too long. Clitzia assured him that this time she would definitely be able to repay him. Hearing this, the man reflected on her imperial family name and the fact that she had fought in the war between the two empires since childhood. The man reflects on the fact that she possesses a rare fire rune and also managed to escape from prison and now has received a black card. Tom thinks that what is more important to him is her connection with the Emperor, but he understands that he does not want to let her go and does not know how to keep her. Clitia announces that they should go. The Duke reminds him that he's already scored over 90 points and asks if that's true. She agrees and asks which of those. The girl remembered that she said that if he gets these points, he will be able to bear the title of Northern Duke, and then she will gladly allow you to be kidnapped. Tom claims he got 95 points and asks if that means he passed the test, and then reminds her that she also mentioned that he would allow her to be kidnapped. The Duke looks the little girl in the eyes and asks what she will say and whether her offer still stands. The protagonist objects. The young lady explains that, jokes aside, she can't really allow herself to be kidnapped. He reminds her that she already gave permission. The little girl asks what suddenly came over him, and the man explains that his ladyship caught his attention. The girl asks if this happened immediately after she received the black card. Tom objects and claims that this is not the issue at all, because he is afraid that they will stop maintaining contact as soon as the debt is paid. The gentleman says that he wants to get to know her better, but there is an insurmountable wall between them, and then he asks if there is no other way out for them. The main character turns around and leaves, and the man asks where she's going and then thinks he hasn't finished telling her everything yet. The girl says she wants to go to the bank. Clitzia spent her entire childhood on the battlefield, but later enjoyed a quiet life on the family estate and graduated from the academy with honors. The young lady has read over 100 novels about the Northern Duke as part of her academic work, but understands that there is no real relationship. The main character reflects on how she really likes his face, and therefore thinks maybe she should agree. Tom decides that nothing matters to him because he won't let her go anyway. The young lady thinks she needs to get herself together as she didn't come to the capital for an affair. She turns to the director and tells him she understands his feelings, but right now she's busy with something important. Suddenly the paper covered the girl's face, and I saw that on this paper was her photograph and a wanted poster. The boy who was selling newspapers screamed and said that the girl with red hair and almond-shaped eyes was currently in hiding. The guy screams and says she's wanted for several serious crimes. He also warns her that she possesses great strength. The newspaper seller asks people to be careful if they see this girl. He also said that this is an urgent order from the imperial family and a very large reward. At this time, Ryan woke up Count Miri, who was sleeping in the carriage, and said that as the imperial advisor he should be stronger. Miri claims they've been racing at full speed for a whole week and asks what else he expected. Then she reveals that long journeys are very difficult for her. Ryan says there was no point in sitting in the carriage the entire way, and that he should at least occasionally mount a horse and breathe fresh air. He thought about how stamina is also needed for such long horseback rides. Ryan says he thinks their paths will diverge here. Hearing this, the Count reminds him that he said he had personal business in Shumarin and then asks what exactly brought him here to such a remote place. Hearing this, the man thought he could only say he needed to check on something. Miri reflected on the fact that he couldn't remember ever leaving the capital voluntarily. The Count understands that he needs to focus on his task because he has covered almost the entire distance and now only one important matter remains. Mr. Isaac said he had been expecting Count Miri's arrival and was pleased to greet him, but then coughed. He apologized for feeling unwell. Owen assures that everything is fine because he understands how hard it is for the gentleman now, and then says that he came to find out when the last time his daughter was home. Isaac reports that his health has deteriorated significantly since she disappeared. The Count looked at the sick man and realized his complexion was perfectly normal, but his head was hastily bandaged. The gentleman says he can't even get out of bed, and then starts coughing. The Count thinks it's in his own best interests to find his daughter and doesn't understand what this circus is all about. Meanwhile, Isaac hopes this guest won't suspect anything. The man asks if there are any ideas where his daughter might have gone. Miri wonders if he even knows the direction. The man replies that he doesn't know, because she left in the middle of the night, and his heart can't take it, so he wants her found. Owen asks for forgiveness, and then says that he is forced to say this because according to the law of their empire, relatives of the imperial family are obliged to take all measures to protect them. The Count claims that this means he must use all available resources to search for Lady Clesia, and then he reminds her that she is the emperor's wife, and therefore as a father he must help them. Isaac explains that only he and his daughter live in this estate, and they have few servants, and it is unlikely that any of them are capable of conducting the search. Hearing this, the Count objects and claims that they have people because the Order of the Knights of the Red Lion serves under his command. The man says with surprise that his order was disbanded immediately after the end of the war, and now everything is different. Owen wonders if the Viscount has the right to reassemble it. Isaac asks if that's not the case, and the guest insists that he is indeed the one. The Count says that even though there is a mistake in the documents at the moment, Lady Clesia is the Emperor's wife, and this cannot be taken lightly. Owen reports that they were very much hoping for his cooperation, and will therefore provide all the necessary resources themselves. The Viscount says that as soon as he gets better he will start working because now he is not feeling well. Isaac doesn't understand how he, a frail old man, can gather the knights again, because his heart hurts terribly, and he doesn't understand why his daughter did this to him. Suddenly, the Count, who was sitting on a chair, fainted and explained this fainting spell as fatigue from the journey. The Count explains that he suddenly felt dizzy because the journey was too long. The gentleman says that in any case the Viscount will have to obey the imperial decree. Hearing this, the man says that he has a bad heart, and then lies down on the bed and looks sad. Owen, lying on the floor, says he's losing his sight while the maids don't know how to help their masters. After all, they both felt ill at the same time. At this time, the knights walking through the streets shouting announce that they have an emergency warrant for the arrest of Clesia. The guards say that if anyone sees this woman with red hair, they should immediately notify the city guard. Tom, while in the alley, says that he thinks he can take a rest there because he thinks it's safer there. The little girl looked at the ad and said that this knight is blonde and she will strangle him. Hearing this, the man realized that she was talking about the Emperor's brother, and then said that the situation was not easy, and asked if she had a place to hide. Clesia looked at the guy and asked if his offer was still open. Within minutes, the young people found themselves at the capital's port. The main character was surprised seeing the capital's largest port and many ships. She wondered why everything had turned out this way. The young lady reflects on how she was first very unfairly put behind bars, which is why she had to escape, although she understands that she is also a little guilty. The little girl thinks that perhaps she did something wrong, but she doesn't understand whether this is a reason to declare a search. Clitzia does not understand why the master's assistant is looking at her so closely and assumes that he does not trust her. At this time, Luke is thinking about the fact that the girl who won the master's heart turned out to be a fugitive criminal, and now things are not going well. Tom announces that they will be sailing on a ship. Hearing this, the main character thinks that now she can only trust this man. The girl asks the director whether they really have to swim across the sea, because she thought that it would be enough to wait in some secluded place. The little girl reminds him that he's the head of a large holding company and probably has a ton of safe houses even in the capital. He insists that's problematic. The Duke reports that the reward for her capture is too high and that in order to hide her, he would have to contact third parties. The man believes that some of them will certainly be tempted by such a sum, and none of those people can be trusted completely. Tom says that it is possible that they were followed even on the way to the port, and therefore suggests that they hurry. The lady asks in surprise if his ship is ready and where they will sail. The gentleman informs them that they will cross the ocean on his ship and offers to trust him. Hearing this, the little girl was surprised and asked if this boat was capable of sailing that far. The director smiled and then showed off a large ship that belonged to him. He explained that the ship was equipped with a powerful magical engine. Tom says that this ship can accommodate more than 1,000 people because there are hundreds of cabins and all kinds of entertainment, theaters, restaurants, conference halls, and so on. The girl asks in surprise if they will really sail on this giant without other passengers. Jan assures her that this will be the case, and then takes her hand and tells her that this flight is intended only for her, my lady. Clitzia tried to keep a low profile, but in recent days she had been extremely depressed. After all, she possesses exceptional courage and willpower. These qualities help the main character to face any challenges and not lose hope. But more and more difficulties continued to fall on the young lady's head, from marriage to being declared wanted. When the lady boarded the ship, she felt that she could rest because such a series of events would have exhausted anyone, and finally she was able to breathe deeply. The surprised Count asks Milady what she is doing, and then asks her to be careful because it could be dangerous. The little girl replies that this is every girl's dream, and thinks that it's probably strange to ask this now. The lady asks if he is afraid that helping a wanted fugitive is risking his reputation too much. Clitzia believes that the capital will pay attention to the sudden departure of such a vessel. Tom asks Togo if they should discuss this at the table. He says they're not in any danger at the moment. The man says that his ship is on an exclusive route regulated by the Furs Empire and therefore there is no reason to worry. The gentleman says that in addition they are sailing to a popular place among clients, the Duchy of Floria, which is the only point in the entire empire that has autonomy. Hearing this, the little girl screamed and said that the newspaper Empire Every Day wrote that it was definitely worth visiting at least once in a lifetime. The girl knows that this place is on the list of the most popular resort areas and also for honeymoons. The gentleman turns to Milady and asks if it is possible that she will finally reveal her true identity to him because he wants to know it. Tom says that if the girl he helps ends up being folded by the Empress, then he really is risking a lot. Hearing this, the little girl realized that he really helped her a lot, and therefore she thinks there is no longer much point in hiding it, and then she agrees. Floria Island is located south of the mainland of Ashi with a mild climate all year round, emerald sea, gentle waves, and coral islands. People call it paradise on earth without exaggeration, and everyone dreams of visiting it at least once in their life. The young lady took off her shoes and ran with delight along the white sand and enjoyed it. Clitzia says that the newspaper wasn't lying because the sand there really is soft as silk, and besides, this is the first time she's seen so many shells. The man realized she now seemed to intend to call him Duke. He reminded her that running barefoot on the beach was dangerous, and the girl tells him not to worry because she believes that she has strong feet and everything will be fine. A few minutes later, my lady fell down and asked why the hell they put a pole on the shore. The gentleman with blonde hair says that he feels awkward about this and then extends his hand to help her. The stranger asks if she's hurt. The little girl looks at the man and thinks he's the 12th Prince of Floria Andrew. The Duke announces that the great Prince of Floria stands before her. The protagonist declares that she is honored to meet such a distinguished man. The prince smiled and suggested they skip the formalities since things weren't so strict in Floria. Then Andrew greeted his brother. The girl, surprised, asks the Duke if he knows the local prince. He explains that they have a business relationship and have known each other for a long time. The prince, surprised, says that now he understands that she is the companion of his dear friend, and then gives her a flower in her hair. The gentleman says that golden hibiscus grows in Floria, and he thinks it perfectly complements her fiery red hair, and then they greet them joyfully. Andrew claims that their vacation will be unforgettable because he will do everything for their comfort. The Duke thought that he would be back to his old ways as soon as he saw the girl. Tom does not think that he satisfies my lady's preferences because she likes the image of the Northern Duke, and he knows about it. Clitzia asks the gentleman what he means by an unforgettable vacation. Hearing this, the man smiles and asks if she's looking forward to it already. Andrew recommends visiting the night market, and the little girl asks if he doesn't mind accompanying them because he thinks it will be more fun together. Tom reminds the young lady that it is time for them to go to their accommodation as her current outfit is not very suitable for these places, and therefore suggests choosing something better. The main character thought that she would need to pick something to match the color of the hibiscus. The prince, watching the girl, thought that he had not expected such a turn of events. At the Rukin mansion in Floria, the prince came to visit them, and the gentleman was surprised. Tom says that not even 30 minutes have passed since they separated. The Duke asks if the prince has any important business. He assures him that all state affairs have been completed for the day and suggests that his friend not be so cold-blooded. The fair-haired guy asks where his companion is, who made an unforgettable impression on him. Tom explains that she went shopping and she enjoys choosing outfits, so she will be late. The prince says he's sorry because he wanted to admire her beauty once again. Tom asks if he came only for her sake. Andrew believes that even though times have changed, he wonders if he dares to lay claim to the woman of His Highness Servane. The young gentleman insists that she is not his wife at all and asks why he thought so. And the prince says that he will not poke his nose into their relationship, and then it is reported that he has heard interesting rumors. Andrew says that it looks like there was a commotion in the emperor's palace, and then asks if it was really his doing. The blonde man assures that what happens on the mainland doesn't really concern him since he has enough of his own affairs. The prince says that he wishes to maintain neutrality, and Floria is their beautiful pearl, and he will not allow her to become a victim of imperial intrigues. Meanwhile, at the estate, Megerino Viscount asks the Count if he can stop this surrealism. Owen asks in surprise what he is talking about because he can barely make out what he is saying. Eisen thought that this bastard had been lying in bed for several weeks and hadn't moved. Miri reflects on the fact that he is comfortable and can lie like this his whole life because he has no work. Suddenly, a maid bursts into the room and addresses the master. He asks in surprise what's wrong, and she informs him that a letter has arrived from the capital. The maid reports that the young lady has been declared wanted with a reward of 500,000 ruels. Hearing this, the Duke got out of bed because he was so interested in the letter and he wanted to read it himself. The maid says that, moreover, it is reported that she was spotted in the middle of the night at the port with a suspicious man. The Viscount asks in surprise which man they are talking about since he doesn't understand anything. The woman explains that so far all that is known is that they boarded a ship belonging to Toma Holdings. The Duke quickly got out of bed and said that things looked like they were heading for trouble. Owen claims that he will immediately return to the capital and take responsibility. The Viscount says that sometimes freedom and wandering are necessary for growth, but he trusts his daughter. Isaac claims that he didn't want to get involved personally, but since some bastard has picked on his daughter, he can't sit idly by. The gentleman orders that everything be prepared for departure immediately, because he is going to the capital to search for his only daughter, for whom he is very worried. While Count Miri headed to the estate of Viscount Megerino, captain of the guard, Ryan was on his way to the Schumarin Academy. Clitzia Megerino, a girl who became empress through a stupid mistake. The man claims that when they first met, he thought there was nothing to worry about. Ryan doesn't understand how she knows Eugene's servant, and besides, there is also some connection between his brother and her father. The young gentleman reflects on the fact that he only needs to find the missing details, and the best way to do this is to conduct his own investigation. The Marchioness greeted the gentleman and asked if he had come about. Sister Cornelia is a professor of mathematics at the academy and also the current president. Ryan reports that he is pleased to meet the head of the Northern Duchy Research Center. The Duke knows that in the official documents only 2 lines were written about Klitzia. The Schumann Academy's Faculty of Architecture and founder of the scientific community SISG, this mysterious community's purpose remains unclear. Everything suggests this is an ordinary student interest group, and the young gentleman is curious to know if this is true. He reveals that he is the captain of the Palace Guard. Cornelia argues that in the CIS, a person's personality is not as important as his passion and interest in scientific research, and freedom of scientific thought is the fundamental right of all citizens of the empire. The woman believes that even the emperor's power cannot suppress her because she does everything flawlessly. Hearing this, the gentleman does not understand what is happening and asks why she is saying all this. The head mistress reminds him that he requested information about the activities and a list of all members of the CSG, but they cannot so easily reveal to him the results of their work. The lady asks what his purpose is. Ryan thought he hadn't really expected to learn anything important, but it seemed this was a very unusual organization. The man believes that first it is necessary to find out its main essence, and then says that his goal is the same as her research, because he has always been interested in the topics that they study here. The gentleman asks if there is a more effective community in this area in the entire empire, and then suggests conducting an entrance test. The blonde insists that this is a basic knowledge test, and she wants to make sure that he fits into their community, and at that moment, he thought that this provincial professor thinks that there is a need to conduct a test for him. The man reflects on the fact that even the best minds of the capital's academy recognized him as a genius, and the lady asks the first question and suggests choosing the right color combination. The professor started to watch the clock, and the gentleman thought that this was some kind of code because these color combinations contained a hidden meaning, and therefore he would have to choose at random. Ryan realizes that he has never heard of such tests, and therefore thinks that he just needs to choose one option. The woman says that time was up and he did not pass because he was thinking for a long time. The lady announces that the test is now over. The young man asks her to wait and is sure the question is asked correctly. Cornelia submitted a paper on geometry at age 11, and at 14, she proved Kertma's theorem. At 17, the scientific community recognized her as a genius and awarded her the status of scientist. However, she turned down prestigious jobs in the capital and instead chose to remain at the small Schumann Academy. Rumor has it that a certain area of research has caught her interest. Ryan claims there's an error there and wonders if the question shouldn't be followed up with an explanation. The man explains that she told him to choose the right combination of colors, but did not even explain what they meant. Cornelia invites him to listen and then asks if he really wants to join SISG without even knowing the basics. She hopes he has at least some potential for exploration. The lady says that's fine, but for your zeal, you'll only get one chance and suggests you master the basics on your own and then try to take the test again. The professor says that this is the door of truth that opens only to those who are ready to devote themselves to knowledge. While in the library, Ryan thought that this paper was the numbering of the books in the library, and he carefully checked all the numbers because he thought that this was the correct answer. An extremely mysterious community that produces no research results and has a strict process for accepting new members. The gentleman does not understand how such a serious organization settled in this backwater, and he understands that the further it goes, the more interesting it becomes. The man decides to start the first book, which was called The Immortal Love of the Duke of the Northern Lands. Ryan thought about how, in addition to his main position as captain of the guard, he owned vast lands in the north of the empire as a duke. After reading several books, the young gentleman thought about how much time he had spent in the library and realized how stupid he had been in the face of great science. Ryan reflects that in this case he should compete to defend his right as the true Northern Duke. At this time, the emperor asks his assistant why his brother went with Miri. However, the secretary assures that he knows nothing because the lord did not tell him anything. While one of them was revealing the importance of his title for the first time, the other Northern Duke was enjoying a beautiful night and having a good time strolling through the Floria night market. The Duke turns to Milady and asks her to slow down, and she suggests that he keep up. The man asks if she likes this place and thinks she is delighted. The girl says that she really likes the night market because it is so romantic and atmospheric, and she really likes the dress because she doesn't understand how it can be so beautiful, light, and comfortable at the same time. The main character asks the man if he wants to change his clothes himself and thinks that it is worth choosing a more suitable outfit for Togo so that he too would feel comfortable and at ease. Tom assures that everything is fine. Suddenly, the little girl saw a crowd of people and became curious about what was going on there, then quickly ran. The Duke thought that she was like a little child, but he believed that a little childishness would not hurt, and then he quickly ran after her so that she would not get lost. The actor says that this is a puppet theater, and today there is a story that they will tell, and it will be the legend of the great dragon Ashi. Long ago, when the world was filled with monsters, the dragon Ashi wanted to help defenseless humanity. So together with their friend Kukas, they created a safe land for children. As a sign of their love for humanity, they gave them a symbol of communication, a flower capable of granting wishes. The girl says this story is very similar to the one from the Queen's Empire. Clitzia understands that some details are different, and the guy says that this is because the island of Floria also belongs to the continent of Ashi, and that is why this is the story. Tom reports that all the mainland countries, including his own, have different versions of Asha's dragon. Milady asks if the Duke isn't originally from their empire. The man explains that he grew up in a rather poor region as a child, and then says that, in any case, the theater has come to an end, and it is time for them to return. The main character says that in their story, the law of promise was a flower, and theirs was a sword, and then asks if it's fun, but the guy just remains silent in response. The gentleman thought he'd almost given himself away. Eugene Weiner doesn't exist. His name is Toma Ruriken, and he's the natural one. The man reflected that he had been telling himself this thought both in his sleep and while awake to never reveal his true identity, and he couldn't understand how this could have happened. Suddenly, the little girl saw a crowd of people and asked if a fight was starting there, and suggested that it looked like they were holding a martial arts competition, and that it was a tradition. The man insists that runes and equipment cannot be used, only pure physical force. Anyone who cannot continue the battle or is outside the designated area loses. The main character realizes that this is essentially the only type of battle that their pacifist king approved of. And people were grateful for this because it was an opportunity to somehow have fun. The man screams and asks which of them is ready to challenge the martial arts genius Reuben. Then he offers to come out if they are not cowards. The Duke tells the lady he doesn't think she'll be interested in watching, but the girl quickly stands before the man and insists she simply must win him over. Hearing this, the stranger was surprised and said that she was cute, and then asserted that if she wanted to play, she should look for another place. The man says that you can get hurt here, and the main character says that she would like the man to close the door because the ending will show everything. People are screaming and saying that it looks like something interesting is brewing because this lady has a sharp tongue, and they are wondering if she is really a noble woman. The man attacked the main character with his strong fists, but she quickly dodged and a fight began. The girl dodged so quickly that Reuben couldn't even touch her no matter how hard he tried. The man asks if he's just trying to hurt such a cutie. Meanwhile, Reuben looks at her face and thinks she's not even trying. The man does not understand where such a small body gets so much strength because she can handle everything she loves. And at this time, the main character thought that even though she was playing, she couldn't swing along. Clitzia understands that she shouldn't finish too quickly, otherwise she'll upset the audience, and she thinks that she finally has a chance to let off some steam. A man from the crowd asks Reuben if he really decided to lose to this skinny girl, and then angrily reminds him that he bet money on him. The man angrily asks how dare he speak to him like that, and then claims that he is Reuben, a martial arts genius, and then turns around to hit my lady. Suddenly the man used the wind rune, but the main character dodged even this attack. Suddenly, the Duke decided to intervene in this fight and with one blow buried Reuben in the ground. Tom says Reuben is a scoundrel who just used a rune. Then he asks if using runes isn't against the rules. The little girl claims that she had everything under control, and the Duke then suggests declaring the girl the winner because he believes that it is her right. The organizer explains that the point is that anyone who enters the circle automatically becomes a participant in the battle, and now the competition is between the two of them. Meanwhile, in the Academy's assembly hall, the headmistress says that it's impressive since no one has ever managed to get the maximum score on the entrance exam before. In fact, the difficulty of the CISG exam is not that great, and it is enough to simply cram a huge amount of literature and learn the order in which they are arranged. A woman congratulates student Ryan, and he thanks the professor and says that he hopes for productive cooperation because his dream has come true. Clarence says she'll give them a brief overview of their community's activities. She then explains that they're committed to collecting and thoroughly studying relevant literature. Ryan says he has a question and asks if they could tell him about the Great Purge. The woman asks in surprise how it is possible not to know such basic things. The professor turns to the girl and asks her to answer the question because he hopes that she knows. The lady reports that the Great Purge of events occurred in the 3rd year of Emperor Yang's reign, Queen. Milady says that their current emperor ascended the throne at the age of 16, and immediately after the end of the war with Servan, the high nobility was extremely outraged by this fact, which led to constant assassination attempts and attempts to overthrow the emperor, but it ended with the Marquis being left without his noble titles. The girl reports that this is called the Great Purge because since then there have been no titles higher than Count left in the Queen's empire. The gentleman asks if there were any exceptions since he is confused. The student explains that only 2 families managed to escape the consequences of that affair, and the exception was the Duke of the House of Lequenois, who maintained his loyalty to the emperor. The lady says that there is also a duke from House Bartier also bearing the surname de Ferza. Ryan asks, who is the head of House Bartier? The girl replies that this is the emperor's younger brother, Duke Ryan Bartier, who is also a handsome man. The gentleman claims that the girl is well erudite and asks what lands belong to the duke. The student replies that these are the northeastern borders of the empire, including the Zeri Range, and then says that she has been there, and these lands are very beautiful. The Duke reports that it turns out that he is Ryan Bartier and is the great Duke of the North that she has been so desperately searching for. Hearing this, the women were surprised because none of them even suspected it. The professor claims he's not eligible because a duke is supposed to have black hair. However, Ryan insists that he is in fact a duke. The headmistress says that this is not true because he has blue eyes, not red, and besides his character does not correspond at all to the Northern Duke. Suddenly, a commotion erupts in the classroom. The professor orders the nonsense to cease and the student Ryan to take a seat. The lady says that since we've finished with the greeting, she's announcing the schedule. The woman says that attendance is mandatory for all community members, and this especially applies to newcomers whose membership may be revoked if they fail to appear. The Duke says he has a question, and then asks if this is timed to coincide with the founding of the empire. The director explains that the day of the seminar coincides with this holiday, and this is a long-standing tradition. The guard captain was surprised to hear this, and the woman explained that the venue was the main hall on the 4th floor. He thought he couldn't leave the palace on such an important day. At this time in the city of Muta, a worker looks at the horse in surprise and does not understand how it eats so much meat, because no matter how much he looks, he is still amazed. At this time, the horse thought that this was delicious, and when the owner left him here at first, he was a little upset and missed her. The animal reflects on the fact that for now he cannot work and still receive meat 3 times a day and believes that this is heaven on earth. The groom calculated his expenses and thought that Clycia's debt was growing and growing. The worker reports that a group of travelers also dropped by, and it looks like the horse is also a hybrid. Shukrim looked at the hybrid horse and realized it was Alexander. He asked in surprise if he shouldn't be with Clitzia. The animal explains that it just so happens that he must wait for her here, and then asks what brought him here. Suddenly the Viscount entered the stable. Isaac and Miri successfully reached Muta, but Miri urgently needed to rest at the hotel. The Viscount asks where they got this horse from, and the man explains that he is here as collateral. The gentleman, having heard this information, realized that his daughter owed 50,000 rubles. The man claims that in addition to this, all expenses for the maintenance of the collateral property are added to the total debt. The groom explains that every day he eats meat enough for 25 people. Hearing this, the father was surprised because she had thought of giving shukrim as collateral. The Viscount thought that his daughter should be responsible for her own actions, and the man, surprised, asked if that meant he didn't intend to do anything. The groom explains that it was the horse that caused all the damage, and that is why its owner is in such debt, and then asks if he wants to pay off the debt with the horse. Isaac says that he is far from an ordinary steed and that he is a very rare and powerful creature, capable of pulling several carts without stopping. The gentleman claims that if she were sent, for example, to a coal mine, her strength would replace an entire group of adult men, and therefore the master would always be the winner. Hearing this, Shukrim asks Alexander to stop his master. The animal asks how he should do it, but then says he can't. Dragon blood in her veins. After all, only she can understand them and help them in any situation. At this time, the main character turns to the Duke and says that they finally have the opportunity to fight, and then asks if he can handle it. The gentleman says that he can play along with her, and then asks if she is sure about this, since he is not used to giving in. The girl realized that she couldn't let her guard down because she had to win. Tom looked at my lady and realized that she was damn strong and understood that if she was too careless, she would regret it. But of course this did not mean that he would seriously fight her. The man thought that he would not give up too easily, and at that moment the presenter announced that they could begin. An even larger crowd of people gathered around who wanted to see this show. The Duke realized she was getting ready to kick him because she raised her leg and then he grabbed her knee. She asked in surprise what he was doing. The man turns to his lady and says she shouldn't throw her leg over her head like that because everything is visible. She takes advantage of this opportunity and hits him. The locals smile and say that this woman is amazing because this guy lasted less than Reuben. They can't understand how such a fragile woman managed to overcome them. Meanwhile, in the port of Floria, the lady asks the Duke if he is very upset about yesterday, and then says that she is ashamed that she hit him while he was distracted. The girl says she didn't know he'd fall from one blow. The guy tells her not to worry because it's his own fault for letting his guard down. Tom asks Milady what she intends to do next. She explains that as he already knows, due to a document error, she is temporarily considered Empress. Clitzia says that when she went to the capital to sort everything out, she managed to end up behind bars, and she understands that if she continues to sit here, the problems will not resolve themselves. The little girl says that's why she's thinking about returning to the capital. Suddenly she sees a pirate flag on the ship and, surprised, shows it to the Duke. The gentleman explains that they received special permission from the ruler to enter the local waters, and therefore suggests not to worry because this island is a neutral zone. A brave pirate warrior who holds in his heart the love of only one ruler of the seas, Milady invites the Duke to visit them. Hearing this, the man thought that she realized that she was always drawn to the problem, and then said that she thought it was possible, but did not know how to approach them because there were many people there. A young lady sees many poor people near the ships and surprised asks if they are pirates. The gentleman explains that they are refugees. After the Great War, many residents lost their homes and lands, and people who couldn't settle anywhere now live on ships because who would want to take in a bunch of hungry mouths? Clitzia asks why they have this flag. The man explains that they don't have citizenship and so they have to fly a pirate flag to keep real pirates from bothering them. Luckily, the Florian king understands their situation and even supplies them with supplies. The ruler of the Fyrds accepted all surviving citizens as subjects of his empire. It was stated that no one would be expelled from their native lands, and the main character does not understand why refugees appeared since they have a hard time. The lady asks the girl if she is a noblewoman, and then wonders if the troubles of war can bypass absolutely everyone. The woman says that someone always benefits and someone loses everything because she doesn't understand where the emperor gets the resources to help absolutely all the inhabitants. The marquise claims that even if people start complaining, she doesn't know what to do now that Fyrza has already seized their lands. She doesn't know if there's a land without poor people. The lady apologizes for chatting and then says that if they have seen enough, then let them step because this is the reality of this world. Jan Fyrza, who maintains the image of a war hero and noble ruler, but his true essence is that all people in the conquered lands are rightfully considered subjects of the Fyrza. Klitsia says that Emperor Furza personally declared that all people in the conquered lands are rightfully considered subjects of Furza, and also said that every citizen of the empire has the right to a safe life. Hearing this, the man asks if he could have said anything else. The main character points at the man and asks him to sell him. Tom turns to Milady and explains that for refugees who have no home, he will be a good shelter, and Thabo is a miracle of marine engineering and an important link in Tom's fleet. The gentleman explains that it costs at least 20 million rubles, and at that moment the girl shows a black card and says that she will pay immediately. Thus, the owner of Tom Rukin's ship is Klitsia. She addresses the strangers and informs them that from now on, this ship will be their home. The young lady says that this is the grace of His Imperial Majesty John Furza, and therefore the ship will henceforth be called John Furza. Eugene had many times felt like objecting, for example, because of the embezzlement of money from the Emperor's personal account, because the refugees had transferred the pirate flag to their new ship. But what bothered Eugene more than anything else was that people were shouting as they greeted Jan Furza and wished the king a long life, and also called him the King of the Seas. The refugees' cries are dubious and even dangerous. The Duke realized that it was now possible to legally bring charges against John Furza, and believed that such an opportunity could not be missed. At this time, Lord Roberts screams and calls for Count Miri, because he does not understand where the Count is now. The secretary explains that he went to Shumarine on a business trip, and will return soon. Hearing this, the assistant fell to the floor and screamed, saying that it couldn't be, and the lady surprised asked the Lord what had happened and what the problem was. The man explains that someone withdrew 25 million rubles from His Majesty's account. Hearing this, the lady was surprised because she did not understand who dared to touch the Emperor's property. The Lord says that the money was withdrawn from a black card issued in the joint ownership of the spouses. In other words, the runaway Lady Megirine spends the Emperor's money. When the lady came to His Majesty, they did not understand why the Emperor looked as if he already wanted to finish someone off. The Lord thinks that as luck would have it, he has an audience scheduled today, and understands that if he were to report to him now that the money has disappeared, trouble would be inevitable. The man understands that His Majesty will definitely finish them off. Lady Clarence asks if they have a message for the Emperor. The woman asks if they've had any problems again. The Lord says there are very serious matters and asks if the lady is in a good mood. Clarence announces that the long-awaited guest has arrived and therefore offers to greet Isaac Megerino, with whom Miri arrived. The Lord, together with the secretary, is trying to say that His Majesty is being robbed and that Lady Megerino has opened a black card and is now throwing money around. Isaac is a former knight of the King's Guard. He earned recognition on the battlefield and bravely led the Order of the Red Lion. After the end of the war, the Viscount was granted a noble title and lands by Shumarine. And in the Megerino family, only the Viscount himself and his only daughter remained. However, judging by His Majesty's reaction, there's clearly something else going on. Earl Owen reports his arrival, and the Viscount says he brought him by His Majesty's order. Suddenly the gentleman saw that his sword had disappeared and said that he was sure that he would ignore his words as usual, and then asked if he really had free time this time. Isaac claims that this is a misunderstanding, and then asks if he dares to ignore His Majesty's orders and defend himself with weapons. The Viscount says that it seems that in his absence the Emperor has significantly improved his fencing skills, and at this time the subjects do not understand what is happening because they are seeing this for the first time. Claricia quietly says that Count Miri must not be in the know, and then says that Sir Isaac once taught the Emperor fencing, and that this was 20 years ago, right before the start of the war. The woman says that he refused the post of Commander-in-Chief of the First Army, and the Servan army has already crossed the borders of Roxen. The little emperor said that the truce concluded in Recanois will soon disappear, as he understands that they are literally on the brink of war. The boy claims that even his father said that their army needs a strong general, and then asks where he is going to go leaving the capital in such a situation. Isaac assures His Highness that he is not throwing it, and that his ball still faithfully serves the First Empire, and that he will do everything in his power to keep it that way. Power to protect it, no matter where he is. Jan Viskriki Vaya asks why, and then claims that he was always there from the moment of his birth, but is unable to even explain the reason for his departure. The man explains that his beloved is carrying a child under her heart and therefore asks His Highness to forgive his unworthy servant. The emperor says that he never knows how everything will turn out because that same daughter became his formal wife. Isaac asks how they could have made such a mistake in the documents. At this time, Clarissa watched them and thought that the atmosphere was much better than she expected because 20 years ago he swore that he would kill Isaac at the next meeting. Mary was surprised to hear this, and then asked the lady how old she was if she knew what had happened once, and he was interested, but the woman remained silent in response. The emperor says that Mary managed to chop wood again, and the master looked at the drawing and said that it was unsuccessful because he could not recognize his daughter in it. Jan thinks that it seems that this is why director Tom sailed to Floria and therefore understands that in this case bringing her will not be difficult, and then says that he will order everything to be prepared. The gentleman turns to His Majesty and asks if he will sail to Floria with him since he believes that then they will need the presence of a priest. The emperor claims that the palace cannot be left empty, and then says that he will guard it and maintain order. Subordinates ask His Majesty in surprise whether he wants to entrust the Viscount with imperial powers and consider this unthinkable, and therefore propose to reconsider the decision. Ian claims that he cannot entrust the palace to that idiot Ryan because there are no direct descendants or other members of the Furz family left. The emperor says that Isaac is the closest person to his family and the one he trusts most, and then asks if he's wrong. The gentleman says with a laugh that he is the king of pirates, and there is no one who has not heard this proud name, Jean. Jan Furza not only gifted the pirates a luxurious ship, but also sent them enough provisions to last for several years. He asks where else one can encounter such miracles of generosity. The man claims that his brother and the young lady let their guard down, and he replies that it's not just because of that woman, but because there was simply a small hitch with the financing of the plan. The gentleman explains that the purchase of a plot of land in the Lurt Mountains due to the unexpected discovery of a gold mine has caused land prices to skyrocket, and this has caused some problems. The fair-haired gentleman smiles and says that they are already so close to the finish line, and then asks when they will organize the ceremony to mark the beginning of construction. The assistant explains that they will do this immediately after the founding of the state, because they have been working towards this for a very long time, and it already feels like the end is coming soon. Several days have passed since the main character's arrival in Floria. She recalls the Duke's words to make her feel at home. The gentleman claimed that it was he who brought her here, and therefore she need not worry about expenses. The little girl believes that this place can truly be called heaven on earth. Klitzia begins to worry that she has wasted too much time because she does not understand why there is still no reply letter. The girl reflects on the fact that her father should have received her message long ago. Suddenly, a stranger hands the girl an umbrella and says that it is very bright today. The gentleman asks if she wants to take shelter from the sun. The lady, surprised, asks if they've met before. The man says that he feels like this is their first meeting, and the little girl thinks that he is incredibly handsome, but doesn't understand why his face seems familiar to her. Clydia reflects that while the Duke of the North is characterized by black hair and red eyes, this man is blessed with the royal combination of yellow and blue. The girl thought that she truly only liked the image of the Duke. The handsome man asked if she was relaxing or alone, and the girl replied that she wasn't. The little girl looked at the gentleman and thought that she would not give in, but he fed her ice cream with a spoon and asked if she liked the local dishes. The main character reflects on the fact that her heart belongs exclusively to dark-haired handsome men. However, they agree to meet again. The young lady tells the Duke about her day and that the stranger even said he'd come pick her up himself. He thinks the young lady is having a good time. Tom reports that considering that she met that man for the first time, she asks in surprise what he means since she doesn't understand what he's talking about. Clydia thinks that this is all because the Duke is too busy to have fun and relax together, and she asks if he is jealous. The little girl, smiling, wondered if this was some kind of love conflict between light and dark. Hearing this, the boy thought it was true. Tom quickly escorts the girl out of the office and asks for forgiveness because he needs to work in silence. The Duke realizes that he has had very little free time in recent days. The guy thought that even though he had deviated from their joint vacation under various pretexts, he still felt uncomfortable because he didn't understand why she was so careless. The Duke wonders if it is possible to meet random men so easily, especially since she said that he is the only ideal. The man understands that according to the laws of cliché, the great Duke of the North realizes his feelings too late, and the bright knight who challenges him is a new fashionable trend in the entire genre. Tom thinks the only thing that matters to the little ones is that a man is handsome. He asks Milady if she ever asked why the man had sailed to the island. The girl explains that he only said that he wanted to restore his health, and that he even had the title of Duke, but he didn't say anything else about himself. Hearing this, the gentleman surprised asserts that there should have been no titles higher than Count left in the Empire, and then asks if she had heard of the Great Purge. The main character believes that he is a foreigner, and that purely formally the ruler of Floria also bears the title of Duke, and asks if this is true. Hearing this, the Duke does not understand why the hell this happened. He began to wonder if this was too suspicious, because he knows that he cannot trust anyone. That night the Duke had a dream that a fair-haired gentleman touched his face and asked if he knew his name, and then said that he was the last offspring. The guy said that his name was John Furza, and the man replied that this was correct, and asked if he was the son of Arya, and said that his mother was Athena's half-sister. The gentleman says that it turns out they are cousins. Hearing this, the black-haired guy attacks him with a sword and asks him not to make fun of him. The boy asks Jan how he dares, and then insists he will pay for what he did. The young emperor says it seems there's no point in talking to him now. Jan looked at the guy and said that he would give him time to cool down, and suggested that he come when he healed the scar because he had something to discuss. At this time, Tom woke up and realized that it was just a dream, and then grabbed his leg and said that, "Damn Jan Furza." Eugene's godfather Homar apologizes for not having time to prepare a proper reception, as he did not expect to have to receive guests from the palace so early in the morning. Acting Emperor Isaac decides to pay a visit to the Rurikan family, and thus he suddenly surprises the owner of the house. Count Owen Myrie is the youngest graduate of the Imperial Academy, and while holding the post of advisor to the Emperor, he also bears the title of the brightest mind of the century. The man thought that since Owen Myrie himself was accompanying him, it meant that he was truly an important person. The owner understands that they came without any warning, citing the imperial decree. Komar watches the man vigilantly unsure of what's going on, and assumes there was a leak after that incident. However, he knows he's carefully covered all traces of them. Isaac explains that the issue is that his son ran away with his daughter and thinks that maybe as fathers they could resolve it. Hearing this, the owner was surprised, because he realized that this girl with red hair who was at his house and then screaming said that his daughter seduced him. Homar claims that from his early childhood he raised Toma with such care and attention sensibly and prudently, and all just for the sake of his slob taking him away. Isaac, hearing this, screams and asks if he said his daughter is a slob, and then explains that she has her own style and natural beauty. The Viscount believes that his daughter would not be the first to seduce anyone, because he raised her and knows how she behaves. The owner asks if he can imagine how hard it is for him to wake up and immediately hear the news that his son has sailed away with a wanted criminal. Mary whispered something in the gentleman's ear, and the Viscount said that some details had just been revealed to him, and then reported that Tom had cancelled all flights and had hastily assembled the crew. Isaac wonders if he ever considered that his son would go so far for love, and the first round of their competition goes in the Viscount's favor. Meanwhile, in Floria, the main character meets the Duke. He explains that he's come as promised, and in his hands is a beautiful bouquet of flowers. The girl enthusiastically says that these flowers are wonderful, and she really likes them. She hasn't yet realized that this is a meeting between Eugene and Jan. At this time, Tom thought that at first he could not believe it, but he realized that this man was John Furza, and then he came up to him and said that it seemed like this was their first meeting, and shook his hand. Ian says he's pleased to meet you. Tom puts his hand on the girl's shoulder and asks if she'd like to just relax at their estate today. The Duke says that he is sure that the guest has already managed to admire all the local sights, and then asserts that he has the right to invite her friend to his villa. At this time, a three-way meeting was held. The blonde man says the lady spoke a lot about Mr. Rukin and believes that based on her words, the Northern Duke can be completely trusted. Tom says everything is just like it was for him, which means he came here to restore his health. Then he looked coldly at the man. At this time, the main character does not understand that from the very beginning there has been some kind of strange atmosphere between these two, and believes that this is some kind of confrontation. The young lady thought that this was a love contest between the tyrant and the duke, and that it was Clytia's fantasy theater, and then she began to watch them even more vigilantly. The gentleman asks for forgiveness because in unfamiliar surroundings he sometimes gets nervous, and it seems that because of this his old illness has worsened. Jan turns to Milady and says that if it's not too much trouble, could she buy him a blue hibiscus flower? The emperor says that the disease subsides a little if you brew tea from it. The little girl agrees and screams that she will do it in a moment and then quickly runs away. Jan looked at his opponent and asked what kind of bones he was building here. The duke says it's an old illness and thinks it's a ridiculous reason. The emperor says that 10 years have already passed, and he never thought that he would grow up to be a hunter of other people's women. Hearing this, the brunette thought that he should be calm because he wanted to finish him off right here and now, but he understood that until the day of foundation, he had no chance of defeating him. The gentleman understands that he shouldn't make a mess, and Floria John says it's a shame since he told him to come as soon as his scar heals. His Majesty asks if he's forgotten. Tom says the scar is still there, and then asks if he overdid it that time. The Emperor says that it is strange for him to hear this because he controlled the power then, and therefore he would like to take a look. Hearing this, the Duke became angry and asked if he had gone mad. The blonde doesn't understand what's wrong because he'll just look at the scar, and if it's still there, he'll let it go without asking any questions. The Duke reminds that he said that there is a scar and says not to touch it. Ian claims that he will only lift his trouser leg and asks why he is so nervous. His Majesty doesn't understand what's wrong with this guy, and then he grabs him and throws him to the floor. He touches his leg and says that he's caught. Jan realized that the scar remained, and at that time the Duke thought that he was as crazy as before since he was behaving very boldly. The Emperor says that this is truly offensive since he is his only fat man, and therefore he tries to treat him gently. His Majesty reports that he was forced to kill his father and brothers. Tom, hearing this, suggests that he leave his hypocrisy behind since he never cared about the rest of the family members. The Duke claims that he will not forgive him for the death of his mother, and then they begin to compete while lying on the floor, but their strength was equal. At this time, the main character enters the room and, screaming, asks for forgiveness for being late because she did not know that buying such a flower would be a problem. Clytia explains that she went to several different stores, but no one had blue hibiscus. However, she was told that red hibiscus has similar properties. Suddenly, the main character realized that there were 2 men lying on the floor, and this meant a confrontation of a different kind. The Duke says that what my lady thought was a misunderstanding and asks for forgiveness. The girl says that it's okay because she also loves this genre, but Tom objects and claims that this is not true at all. At this time, in a luxury 5-star hotel room, Clarencia asks in surprise if they are really saying that Clytia is with Eugene right now. The Emperor says the two are living together and are closer than he expected. He also says that it seems Clytia doesn't know his true identity. The woman asks in surprise how he just left them there alone. Ian asks how he could have done otherwise, considering he's supposed to be playing the role of the ailing Duke. His Majesty explains that he came here to recuperate and asks if this is correct. The lady, surprised, asks if she should play along. Clarencia claims that he arrived in Floria in a hurry to find his wife, and then sent almost the entire crew back, leaving her behind. The woman says that now, instead of trying to return the runaway, all he does is enjoy dates and time spent with her. The Emperor explains that he simply wanted to get to know his wife better. His assistant heard this and screamed, claiming that their girl was not their toy. Clarence wonders if he hasn't heard that Clytia is the youngest knight of the Order of the Red Ice, and that she literally grew up before the eyes of their comrades. His Majesty recalls that she was also a member of that order, and at that time he thought that she had never contradicted him before, but now she suddenly became so serious. The lady says that she guesses that he left her here because of her origin as a replacement for Isaac, because she is useful to him. The gentleman says that everything is correct and suggests not to be so nervous, because after all she has good experience and can help him. Clarence argues that he should not disdain this girl since she strengthened her immunity to poisons with great care and attention. The Duke explains to the main character that this is a big misunderstanding because their guest suddenly staggered and he wanted to catch him but also lost his balance. Upon hearing this, the girl realized she'd been mistaken in her thinking. The gentleman insisted that she must have misunderstood, and the lady says that she has already decided that it is not worth interfering. Tom assures that he was really only trying to help the guest, and the main character smiled and said that she understood and would not tease them anymore. The emperor turns to his subordinate and says that one thing worries him. How will they return her? He needs to check something again. Late that evening, the young gentleman put on a mask and snuck into the mansion. He thought the bedroom must be upstairs. The reason John hid his identity when contacting Cletzia was because he wanted to know what the daughter of the Red Lion was like. The meeting with Eugene was a rather unexpected turn of events, as the emperor found 2 escaped rabbits at once and considered this an extremely successful trip. The gentleman thought that he was worried that these 2 were in the same bedroom, and that was what he most did not want to see. At this time, the little girl asks the Duke if he doubts her massage skills, and then claims that, by the way, this is a very expensive service. The young gentleman objects and reminds that he said he was not interested and believes that a lady should not break into someone else's bedroom. Cletzia says that he can deny it as much as he wants, but she understands perfectly well what he feels, and therefore would really like to help him. The girl says that he seemed offended when she started spending a lot of time with another person, and even when a guest arrived, he resisted him. The main character asks what conclusion can be drawn from this and how much he misses her, and then asks if she guessed right. Tom assures that this is not the case at all, and the little girl explains that she came to pay attention to him and also to help relieve his fatigue. The young lady pushed the man onto the bed and then began to knead his back. He asks in surprise if this is really a massage, because it seems to him that something is broken. The girl explains that of course he is doing well because this technique is always practiced by soldiers. Meanwhile, Jan doesn't understand what the screams are in the bedroom and what's going on, so he wants to take a look. Tom screams and asks her not to massage him so hard, but the lady says that his shoulders are tense and she will fix it now, and therefore asks him to be patient for a little while. The Duke could not stand it any longer because he understood that this body did not understand what was happening, and then he turned the girl over onto the bed and suggested that they stop with this. Cletzia asks if this is really the second time, and then reminds him that he did the same thing during their first meeting in the palace, and asks if he has forgotten her. The girl claims that the Duke is rapidly improving his performance and will soon reach 100 points, and then asks if he still wants this. The Duke says that in any case he would like to rest in solitude. Having heard this, the emperor thought that it seemed that he now understood what the relationship was between them. Ian reflects on the fact that he cannot leave without appreciating his wife's skills, which he wanted to learn, and believes that this was an extremely wrong decision. At this time, the main character says goodnight to the Duke, and when she opened the door, she saw a man using the rune. The emperor thought that she had a good reaction because she dodged so quickly. And at this time, the girl does not understand how she did not feel him because he was standing near the door all this time. The young lady believes that this is clearly not just another petty thief, as she is well versed in this matter, having spent her entire childhood on the battlefield. The girl's warrior instinct screamed that she was facing a very formidable enemy, and that in order to survive, she would need to resort to the strongest move. The man realized she'd used an advanced fire rune here in the building. Meanwhile, Tom, lying in bed, couldn't understand where the runic magic had come from. The uninvited guest reflects on the fact that this is not a simple situation, because he could dodge or make contact, but this would cause a major commotion. The gentleman understands that then that prince will start causing him problems, and he doesn't care whether he is an emperor or not, because if he violates the ban on conflicts, he will restrict his entry. Jan thought that he himself was not delighted, but he understood that there was no other choice, and he needed to use some technique with 2 fingers. His Majesty took advantage of this opportunity and threw the girl to the floor. When the Duke saw her, he ran thinking she had simply fainted. Tom asks the little girl what happened to her, and she apologizes and explains that she missed the attacker and thinks that it is her fault. Hearing this, he was surprised because he didn't even think that someone could break in here. I regretted a little that I didn't come out earlier. The main character looked at her hands and told the Duke in surprise that she could not use her magic and that this was the first time this had happened to her. Rune Moras is the name of the spell that was cast on her, and the Duke informs her of this, and then says that the user must draw a star in the air. Rune magic draws its energy from nature, and unlike magic stones, its use usually cannot be interrupted. However, Rune Moras is able to forcibly suppress the flow of runic energy, and thus the man protected himself from her fire magic. The Duke says that for now she won't be able to use the rune, but over time the energy will restore itself, and for this she needs a little time. Hearing this, the girl thought about what it meant that her magic would return, and that this was the first time she had encountered something like this. The Duke tells my lady to sleep and gain strength because today was a hard day. Clitzia grabbed Tom's cloak as he walked away, and he asked in surprise what was going on. The little girl asks how long he will call her milady, and then says that she doesn't like it. The main character wonders if they can no longer be considered friends, and therefore suggests simply calling her Clitzia, since she prefers it that way. When the gentleman came to his room, he thought that he should pull himself together and not think about her, because now it was important to establish the identity of the attacker. Tom understands that the Rune Moras spell cannot be mastered by just anyone. To completely block enemy magic, 5 elements must be used simultaneously. These elements include darkness, water, wind, fire, and earth. In other words, the coordinated efforts of 5 experienced magicians at once are necessary. However, in the Ferd's Empire, the owners of the runes of darkness and earth have practically disappeared, and the Rune Moras spell itself has not been used for at least 100 years. There's only one person on the entire continent who could use this technique alone, and that's the 5-element mage Jan Furza. He'd paid them a visit before. The Duke thought he must have wanted to test the waters, and now he'd left a warning. However, he couldn't understand how he knew this spell. Tom thinks that he needs to calm down because the plan is not changing, and Jan Furza will be immersed in eternal sleep until the end of this year, and maybe even sooner. The next day, when the Duke saw John, he thought that this bastard had no conscience at all, and then he greeted him and said that he had already looked in on them at night. Tom wonders if he has a lot of free time to wander around. And the Emperor asks if he is confusing something, and explains that yesterday he definitely came to them during the day and not at night. His Majesty claims that he has a prior agreement with the lady and that is why he came. Tom says that he is very sorry, but she is not feeling well today and he will have to leave. The gentleman explains that last night a crazy bastard broke into their home, but suddenly the main character appears and addresses the Duke. Tom asks my lady in surprise if she feels better already, and then asks when she managed to change her clothes. The girl says that it seems to her that it was already light when she woke up. Clitzia asks if she looks well, and Jan assures her that she's simply wonderful. Tom wishes them a good time and leaves. But Jan turns to the Duke of the North and asks why they don't join him because today he wanted to tell my lady something and he thinks that Tom should hear it too. These words interested the Duke and he decided to join them, and then they came to a very good restaurant and ordered lunch. Tom became curious about what this emperor was planning, but he decided to remain silent and say nothing. Jan turns to Milady and asks if she has heard of a man named Eugene. Clitzia assures that, of course, she heard because he is one of the princes of the Servan Empire, and as far as she knows, at one point, this scoundrel was already in the hands of their emperor. The girl asks why Ian just let him go, and then says that her father was very angry about it. The blonde wonders if her father is Viscount Isaac, because he knows him as a good man. The main character explains that she never understood why they even needed to start this war, because the very thought makes her feel uneasy. The little girl thinks that Emperor Servan and his children are birds of a feather and then asks if that's true. John informs her that he's now roaming freely somewhere. Clitzia angrily says that it would be worthwhile to finally catch him before this scoundrel does any more harm. Hearing this, the handsome man smiled because he could no longer hold back his laughter. His Majesty claims that she is right, and the Emperor should have dealt with him on the spot since he believes that he made a mistake, then that now needs to be corrected. Hearing this, the Duke thought about taking this Jan away because he had just recently played the role of a weak and sick Duke, and then asked the Duke if he was from the Ferd's Empire. The handsome man agrees with him and says that's true. Hearing this, the little girl thinks she was mistaken in calling him Duke and doesn't understand why he didn't correct her. The girl asks if he knows about the Great Purge. Then she tells him that His Majesty once destroyed all holders of titles above Count. The handsome man tells her not to worry about him. The main character asks him in surprise if he's sure about this, and then screaming says that their emperor can sometimes be a real psycho. Clitzia says that her father served His Majesty for a long time, and every time the conversation turned to the emperor, he began to turn pale with fear. The little girl suggests just imagining how terrible this man is, and right now she can't return to Furza precisely because of the emperor. The girl says that he is a very wise ruler, but you shouldn't catch his eye if he holds a sword in his hands, because there are rumors that he once slaughtered a bunch of nobles right in the throne room. Handsome believes that perhaps he did not want to leave the traitors alive, but he considers all this to be nothing compared to the massacre on the Carrion Fields, because in that battle, Emperor Furza ended the war. Ian informs Milady that he forgot to mention that the conversation turned to her father, and asks if she knew that he was currently in the capital. Hearing this, the girl, surprised, asks if he knows her father. The man replies that he does quite well, and that he has connections to the imperial family. The handsome man asks the little girl why she doesn't return to the capital with him. Hearing this, the Duke, surprised, asks why he suddenly decided to do so. At this time, Tom was thinking about whether it made sense for him to interfere in this, because all this time he was only Cleisha's companion and not her protector. The man thought that this woman ended up on the island because of the persecution of John Furds, and then he asks if they can no longer be considered friends. The Duke says that he thinks it's really time for her to go back, but he will stay because he still needs to finish some business, and then he will come too. Clitzia says she'll leave anyway. Hearing this, the blonde man suggests they hurry and then gets up from the table. The main character asks in surprise if he wants to sail now since they haven't even eaten yet. The man asks if there is a reason to delay because he understands that it will be better this way. Milady explains that her things are left at the Duke's estate, and the gentleman suggests not to worry because they will send a man to pick them up, and says that it's time for her to go home. At this time, the girl thought that she, of course, understood that she needed to return, but she did not expect that it would happen so suddenly because she did not even really say goodbye. Clitzia tells the gentleman to wait for her for a minute and then turns to the Duke of the North and thanks him for all his help, and therefore promises to repay him as soon as he arrives. Tom wishes her an easy path and only looks after her somehow not happily because he doesn't want her to leave since he realized that he really likes her. The super-fast ship Hermes is equipped with a highly powerful magical engine that embodies the continent's technology. This engineering genius is capable of covering a distance in just 3 hours that would take other sailing ships a whole week. He is rightfully considered the fastest king of the empire, and upon hearing this, the main character is surprised and says that it is simply incredible how fast this ship is. The emperor asks her if she likes it, and she on the left says enthusiastically that he's never been on such a big and fast ship. Then he asks if it really belongs to him. The girl says that he has both beauty and money and considers him lucky. Hearing this, the man thanked him and then said that he had a very good income. Ian reports that he's not without influence. The little girl thought that such phrases would usually be repulsive, but he really is an impressive figure. The emperor says that therefore perhaps he could even influence her problems with the imperial family, and at that time he thought that he had made the right decision. Tom understands that this issue should have been resolved peacefully, and therefore there is no need to worry about it because it is in bad taste. Suddenly, an old man turns to the gentleman and says that he did not expect to meet Mr. Eugene in such a place and at such a time. Hearing this, the young gentleman asks in surprise how he dares to so unceremoniously mention his name, and how he barely survived Xena's disaster and now dared to come to him. Tom thinks it seems his long life has taught him nothing. Hearing this, the old man cries out and turns to His Majesty, asking if he really intends to turn his back on Xena. The Duke, surprised, says that he doesn't seem to understand the situation, and then asks who allowed those idiots to carry out that crazy operation. The man claims that they themselves are to blame for allowing the organization to be destroyed, and it seems they are still planning to implement their special plan. The old man thinks that he knows that John Furza has just left Floria and asks if this is true, and then throws the hammer on the floor and claims that it is all over. The man offers to find out once and for all who truly serves the great empire of Servan, and then asserts that this Jan will never set foot on the continent again. Suddenly, the main character saw something suspicious and asked the Duke what was going on because she was very scared and also wondered if it would explode. At this time, the Emperor thought that apparently, due to the pleasant atmosphere, he had relaxed too much and perhaps had not even been as vigilant as he should have been. After all, the most powerful and influential man in the Furza Empire is also a man with the greatest number of enemies no matter where he is or what he does. This man never has the right to forget that there is a knife at his throat. His Majesty assumes that they have overloaded the control unit of the magical engine. The Emperor believes that everything here will soon explode, and therefore he made a mistake because he should have carried out an even more thorough check. The gentleman understands that whoever did this was very naive in believing that he could be removed with such a pathetic attempt, since such mechanisms can be easily destroyed, and he used his rune. Meanwhile, the main character using magic screams and declares that she will destroy him right now. They suddenly realize that the activated runes can no longer be undone. When two different advanced runes collide, a powerful explosion occurs, but the lords realized this very late. Clarencia asks in surprise what happened and then asks if everything is okay with that girl. After all, at that time, Clarencia was sailing on an accompanying ship. In a few minutes, the Emperor, holding the girl under his arm, walked ashore. And a few hours ago, moments before the terrible explosion using the wind rune Yang, created a protective barrier. In this way, the gentleman distorted the shockwave, and at that moment Clitzia realized that the person was capable of using at least 2 different runes at an advanced level. The girl realized that this man with blonde hair and blue eyes, who called himself close to the imperial family of the Duke, was none other than Emperor Furza himself. At this time, John thought that everything had gone wrong, but he understood that first he needed to save the girl, because that was the most important thing now. The Duke asks Milady why she's sailing away. Meanwhile, the girl is thinking that if she's caught, she'll be accused of insulting the Emperor. The main character believes that in the worst case they will charge her with attempted murder, which is tantamount to the death penalty, and then she begins to swim even faster. Jan turns to the girl and asks her to wait, but she does not stop, and he screams and says that if she continues to swim away, she will be sentenced to execution. The gentleman suggests that the woman calm down and then grabs her, and together they reach the shore and then rested. The witches were very tired since the journey was not short. Kalitzia addresses His Majesty and then uses the rune and quickly lights the fire. Jan suggests that she relax and think better about what she will do next. The little girl explains that at dawn, she could explore the surroundings and look for a place to live, and then says that she will start right now, but admits that it is unlikely to be of any use. The handsome guy says that he thinks they are on a desert island. Upon hearing this, the girl was surprised because she realized that this was a big problem. Meanwhile, Ryan successfully completed his assignment in Shumarin and returned to the capital a few weeks later. He wondered why all the fuss was going on. The assistant asks in surprise if Sir Ryan has returned and then greets him. The gentleman asks in surprise what brought Sir Isaac to the capital since he did not expect to see him. At this point, the young gentleman thought about how, as far as he remembered, the Viscount had declared he would never come here. The secretary explained everything to him. Ryan realized that his brother had personally gone to Floria to bring back Lady Megerino. The Viscount explains that all the tasks that His Majesty gave him were completed. Miri says he hopes his arrival will make things easier, but suddenly Sir Ryan turns around and leaves, and the assistant asks in surprise where he ran off to. Count Miri realized that the master had used the rune because he had disappeared in a few minutes, and they became curious about why he had done this. On his first day on the desert island, the Emperor used the rune and made sure that there was no land or other islands nearby. Jan understands that it is difficult to determine how far they have deviated from course, but he knows that there is also no way to contact the capital. The gentleman believes that he urgently needs to figure out how to get out of here since he understands that they will look for him, but it is unknown in what direction. At this point, the main character shows off the boa constrictor and says they needed breakfast. The man, surprised, asks if they should look for some fruit. However, the girl objects and says that it is much better to eat meat in the morning to have strength, and then suggests that he wait patiently because she cooks it very deliciously. The emperor says that now they should think about how to get off the island, and the girl reminds him that he said that this island is uninhabited. Clitzia wonders if they might not get out or contact anyone, and the gentleman says that's exactly it. She asks, what if they're stuck there forever? The man says he believes they will spend the rest of their lives together. Upon hearing this, the girl was surprised to learn that she would have to be with His Majesty for the rest of her life. The gentleman asks her in surprise if she's upset. She denies it and suggests she's fallen into a kind of captivity. The little girl thought for a bit and then objected and explained that, objectively speaking, no one was holding her captive, and therefore confinement was not appropriate. The lady says that this genre usually involves a dungeon or at the very least a bedroom. The man thought that this woman seemed more and more strange to him. The emperor realizes that she has built a shelter for the night very quickly and is a good hunter, and he must admit that her survival skills are impressive. Jan reflects that, moreover, she knows about the 3 lines of smoke that signal the need for rescue and believes that it was probably her father who taught her everything. At this time, the main character was busy thinking about what genre it was, adventure survival or just survival, because she couldn't decide. Suddenly, the young lady heard a sound and saw a ship in the distance and assumed that they noticed a distress signal. Clitzia started shouting and waving her hand that they were here, and the emperor thought that it looked like luck had smiled on them because not even a day had passed and they were already rushing to help. As the ship approached, they saw a pirate flag. The man said that before them was the majestic ship of John Ferza, following the legacy of the great pirate king John. The captain claims that they are ready to support them without any conditions or discrimination, and that they will be grateful to the mercy of their great pirate king. His Majesty was surprised to hear this and said that this was something new. After all, since the moment he ascended the throne, there had been numerous attempts to overthrow and humiliate him. The emperor says something about someone using his name without his knowledge, and what's more, it's some kind of dirty gang of pirates. The little girl tells him not to be upset and explains that they aren't pirates at all, but refugees, and that they're good people. He asks, surprised, how she knows that. Clitzia explains that she bought this ship with His Majesty's money and gave it to good people. Hearing this, the man was surprised, and at that time the girl showed him a black card. Jan, surprised, asks what she was thinking when she arranged this. She explains that in the first letter, he himself wrote that she was entitled to generous compensation. The little girl explains that's why she thought the card would cover all expenses. He says the girl never even received the money. The emperor doesn't understand how she can spend her money on refugees who have no connection to her. She explains that all these people lost their homes because of the war. The man says he understands that it's impossible to make everyone happy, and the little girl insists that at the very least she wants there to be fewer hungry and homeless people in the world. The main character claims that she is sure that His Majesty would also want this, and therefore asks not to order the execution because she will try to return all the money. The emperor says she's a trouble magnet, but he still wants to get his hands on her. The little girl was surprised to hear this. And at this time the man who was swimming on the boat reports that they are approaching, and when the girl sees them screaming, she says that they are already close. Milady says that there are 2 of them here, and at this time the emperor takes her by the waist, and says that now it is his turn to shout. The man picked up the girl, and using a rune they were transported to the ship. Everyone was surprised to see this, realizing it was the emperor himself. The captain explains that this is the crew of the pirate king, Ferze. His Majesty asks if he can consider himself captain of their ship. People began to scream that the pirate king had descended from the heavens, and even the heroine with him, and then they began to greet their masters. The leader of the ship greets the pirate king and says that he always believed that one day he would visit his people, and they were really looking forward to it. In a few minutes, the assistant brought the pirate king's hat, the pirate king's belt and cloak, and then said that this was the complete pirate king set. The main character looked at this handsome man, how he was dressed, and thought that he liked it, because his light hair became even lighter under the hat. The girl says it's quite funny because these people know how to please the king. The man orders everyone to entertain the pirate king. The boy asks His Majesty to allow him to show his talent because he can ride a unicycle and juggle at the same time. Another boy says he can balance a plate on his head, and an old woman claims she can tell fortunes. Having heard this, the girl became interested in whether it was true, and the woman insists that it is because you can find out everything from the lines on the hand. The old woman took my lady's hand and called her a respected heroine, and then said that this line promises unexpected wealth. Hearing this, the main character screams and asks what to do since it is true, and then asks if she can see her destiny in love. The emperor says he almost forgot, and then asks for the card to be placed on the table. The old woman announces that a magnificent alliance is definitely awaiting her. Clydia wonders if it will be the Northern Duke, and the woman says that a moment of happiness will be followed by a long shadow of loss. The old woman does not understand why her thread of life is connected with someone who is no longer alive. Hearing this, the little girl doesn't know what to make of it, and asks if she will marry a dead man. The woman says that she can now see the fate of the Pirate King, but the little girl asks for one more minute and only one. The witch says that fate is such that it cannot be changed, and the connections and life of each of them depend on the great wheel of fate. The woman claims that the established future is immutable. At this point, the protagonist thought something seemed familiar. The emperor says that he refuses because he does not recognize fortune-telling. Hearing this, the old woman became upset because she thought that she was useless to him. Jan wrote a letter and attached it to the pigeon's leg, then launched it into flight. He realized it was about a 2-hour journey to the base in the Strait of Bonn. The sailor reports that the course has been changed as ordered, and the captain praised them and said that they were great. The man suggests that everyone be careful because the Pirate King is giving the order. When all the people have gathered on deck, the captain says that the young people should go to the right and the old people to the left. The little girl looked at him and didn't understand what he was doing, but she didn't ask. The main character believes that whatever the case, it doesn't look like he's going to return to the ship. The sailor asks the esteemed heroine if she is hot today because there is no wind and offers her a drink of water. Clydia tells him not to worry about her because she's not so great that they call her a heroine. He asks in surprise how she's not great, then insists that's not true at all. The man says that life was rejected and despised, and thanks to them he found peace for the first time. The girl explains that this ship was bought by His Majesty the Pirate King. The young lady understands that this was not his will, but her role was only to persuade him. However, the sailor claims that she, a respected heroine, was at the origins. The man thinks that they are both great benefactors, but suddenly they hear that the sorting is now complete, and then an announcement follows. The captain reports that the crew of the John Ferza have been using his protection carelessly up to this point, and if that were all it took, it could be called a humanitarian mission. Jan asks how they dare call themselves pirates of such a large pirate ship sailing calmly in their waters, and even with respect to him as the king of the pirates. At this time, the pigeon flew to its destination, the Bourbon Naval Base. When the man read the letter, he cried out and asked what it was. The captain doesn't understand how this could be the emperor's personal order, and he wonders if this order is real. The commander of the Bourbon base, Admiral Wilson, asks why His Majesty gave such an order because he does not understand anything. At this time, the emperor turns to his subordinates and announces that from now on, they will all become real pirates under his leadership. The woman looks at the students and thinks that her name is Embert, and at 17 she has become a sage, and therefore will not tolerate the desecration of holy science. The professor asks who dared read novels in her class, and then announces that the book is being confiscated. She starts reading it herself and becomes fascinated. The maid turns to the master and says that if he is uncomfortable lying around doing nothing, she asks if he would like to read a book, because in her opinion, it is very interesting. Miri insists he's not interested in such novels and would rather read the book he brought. He then looks at the surprised maids and realizes everyone is saying he's the weirdest. Ryan approaches the professor and says he has a question, and then asks how two dukes could fall in love with the same girl with red hair and golden eyes. The gentleman asks how she would like this story to end. The woman says that if there are heroes with black hair and heroes with golden hair, the heroine must be blonde. Baron of the Black Coast of Bourbon and Admiral of the fleet Percy Wilson, who protected the waters of Percy for many years, was one of the emperor's most loyal confidants. The admiral despised these pirate parasites of the seas more than anything else. He couldn't understand why he was being ordered to arm a pirate ship that was about to arrive at the Bourbon base. Wilson insists he won't give a single potato to those pirate scum. Upon hearing this, the aide couldn't understand how this was possible. It was an imperial decree. The admiral believes that His Majesty would never have given such an absurd order and believes that it is most likely a forgery since someone imitated the emperor's handwriting. The man suggests that perhaps the emperor was forced to write this under threat. Suddenly, the captain announces that a pirate ship is approaching. The assistant reports that, judging by its size, it is a giant sailing ship, and there is confirmation that it is equipped with a magical engine. Hearing this, the admiral was surprised because he considered it simply incredible, and he was wondering if the decree was really genuine. Wilston thought about how small fish swim into the shark's mouth, and then ordered all troops to prepare their ships for combat readiness. The man shouts out that their goal is the safe rescue of His Majesty, and then states that it is time to show the power of the Navy. When the emperor came ashore, he asked what kind of rescue they were talking about since no one had kidnapped him, and he thought that this was an excellent fantasy of the admiral. Jan says that if this continues, he will become an emperor killed by his loyal general. His aides don't understand how this can happen. The captain says that he never imagined that he would live to see the day when he would see how a pirate ship was armed. The admiral turns to His Majesty and says that he does not dare to doubt his wisdom, but believes that supporting the pirates with weapons is not the best idea. Whiston says that judging by the state of their ship, the crew seems completely untrained, because if you give them a weapon, they won't understand how to use it, let alone fight. The emperor agrees with him and claims he's right, then says they have two problems. The First Fleet is currently too weak to deal with the pirates. The admiral says that after the victory, they slightly expanded their territory, but they barely had time to defend the surrounding waters because they needed to spread out. Jan claims this is his second resignation. He says it's time for him to make way for younger people. The emperor asks if he knows how to solve both problems at once, because he believes that this can be done. The admiral asks in surprise if this is possible, and His Majesty takes off his hat and places it on his head, then announces that from today on he will become the king of the pirates. Hearing this, everyone was very surprised, and the emperor asserted that this was an order, and Sir Wilson must board the ship and train the people he had selected. His Majesty explains that the admiral must train them to rob pirates because an eye for an eye is a pirate against a pirate. Great Jan Ferza, this ship will become the first privateer vessel in the history of the continent of Asha under the patronage of the emperor. These warriors, recently refugees, will now become heroes of the seas, and the legendary one-eyed Captain Nile will command them. However, this story awaits its time. The main character says that they have finally returned to the capital which came to her soul. The girl saw her father and was overjoyed. He surprised asked his daughter what she had done. Klitzia explains that if he had not blocked her accounts, everything could have turned out differently and there would not have been such a commotion and such confusion. The secretary informs His Majesty that an urgent message has arrived from Lord Clarence, and then reports that there has been an explosion, and then asks what happened. Miri says that they were already going to send a search party to the Bourbon base if there had been no news until yesterday, but he heard that the explosion was not powerful enough to pose a threat. The emperor suggests first dealing with the most important thing, which is his runaway bride, and then announces that this fugitive is the current empress. His Majesty's aides say she is wanted for escape and fraud after she forged his name to open a joint account. Jan screams and says that this is enough, and then says that they have a lot to discuss, but they will start with the main thing, and before new obstacles appear, he wants a divorce immediately. Hearing this, the main character doesn't understand why she suddenly feels scared, and Miri thinks that things are finally coming to an end. His Majesty gathered his subordinates in the conference hall of the Empire and then announced that they would skip the formalities because everything was simple, and asked the lady if she also agreed to a divorce. Jan suggests writing this down on a magic stone, and everyone keeping silent because he will agree to all her conditions and anything she wants. Miri turns to His Majesty and asks for forgiveness for the sudden intervention, and then informs that they cannot get a divorce. The Emperor's secret lover. 3 years ago, they overcame their status differences for the sake of love. Lavish gifts, including a luxurious magical ship, and they don't understand where the money came from. Even the Emperor's closest confidants knew nothing, and they became curious about whether the Empress of Persia would soon be declared Mary gives orders to keep everyone out of the meeting room. After reading the newspaper, the emperor, surprised, asks who this informant or journalist is. The secretary explains that it has not yet been possible to establish this, and security is already dealing with this issue. The little girl asked in surprise if it was possible to simply explain everything as it is. The girl suggests claiming it was just a mistake in the documents that made them appear married. Mary believes this isn't just a gossip column. The count says that the error in the marriage registration occurred exactly 3 years ago, and the article clearly states that he started dating exactly then. The secretary claims that in addition, it is hinted that the gifts were paid for from the imperial budget, and that this article was probably written by someone close to the court. Mary assumes that this is done in order to deliberately undermine the emperor's reputation, and if the divorce is completed now, they will blow the situation out of proportion. The secretary believes that it will look as if the emperor secretly brought in a new empress and then hastily expelled her, and in the future it will be difficult to hush up the matter. Clitzia understands the situation is serious and will have to stay in the capital until things calm down. She doesn't understand why she has this strange premonition. The girl thinks it won't be easy at all. Clarencia says it looks like the information didn't leak through the banks, since the bank's head doesn't seem like the type to gossip. The bank's director assured that none of the transactions could have been observed by outsiders. The secretary proposed a search of the daily newspaper's offices. The emperor orders that only the most reliable people be taken and that the numbers be reduced to a minimum. Clarence believes that acting too obviously will arouse suspicion. The woman understands that scandals surrounding His Majesty happen almost every day, but people do not take it seriously, reading it as ordinary gossip. Clarence remembered that she had once asked the emperor whether it was worth responding to false rumors, and he had said that it made no difference because if he ignored them, they would disappear on their own. The woman claims that this is why everything has remained the same until now, but this time it is not a matter of fiction and the situation is ambiguous. The emperor says that he has a different premonition because all this happened a week before the founding of the empire and suggests that perhaps some organization is behind this. His Majesty is ordering an investigation into the Treasury and Administrative Services. Clarence says she understands. Meanwhile, Tom asks in surprise if this information is reliable. Luke assures him that it was verified by a reliable source. The gentleman understands that this means that the cruiser on which the lady and the emperor were exploded and flew into pieces, and they were saved by pirates from Yanferza. Luke assures that this is the case, and therefore he will not be surprised if the gentleman does not believe it, because he himself has double-checked several times. Tom says he believes it because when that woman is involved, everything goes wrong. Brunette believes that if we are to believe what he confessed, the engine explosion was not strong enough to destroy the ship. The Duke does not understand why this ship failed and why the vessel was completely destroyed, and then asks if he was honest about what he did. Luke claims that at first he thought that he simply would not listen to orders anymore. And the gentleman thinks that he did not answer of his own free will, and then asks if he has ever seen this symbol and shows it. The secretary asks in surprise what kind of embroidery is on the handkerchief because he has never seen anything like it before. Tom explains that the old man who carried out the sabotage was watching the situation from the pier, and that he says that someone in red clothes handed him this handkerchief. The gentleman understands that it is necessary to find out who it was, and the secretary says that of course he will take care of it. Luke looked closely at the handkerchief, and it seemed to him that he had seen this symbol somewhere before. Tom says that there is only a week left until the celebration of the Empire's Foundation Day, and they spent more time in Floria than they expected. The woman says that she is still impressed because the president of Percy's largest company, Thomas Holdings, turned out to be such a young and charismatic person. Tom reports that he is surprised that she is the largest landowner in Rilt, and also such an elegant lady. The man believes that now everything depends on her last step, because as soon as she signs, the deal will be completed. Madame says that this is an extremely profitable deal for her, but she is still, of course, worried about Mr. Riken. Rilta Mountains are barren and dangerous lands, and even tourists don't go there. The woman reports that when he said he was going to build a resort in the area, she thought he wanted to buy cheap land and make something worthwhile out of it. The lady claims that gold was recently discovered there and prices have risen 2 or 3 times, and despite this, he insists on that particular plot and its size. Tom asks if she has changed her mind about the deal. She assures him that of course that hasn't been the case. The woman claims that the gentleman is successful in everything he does, and so she thought that maybe he had a brilliant idea that she could join. The Marquise reports that this land was still a burden for her since there was no gold vein there. Tom suddenly saw a handkerchief near the lady's hand and asked if he could ask about the symbol on this handkerchief. The woman asks if he's also interested in the Church of Happiness. She explains that it's the state religion of Persia and that it's a cult. The lady says that it is fashionable now because all the serious people who know a thing or two about money are already there. Madame informs him that she will reveal a little secret to him because the man who brought her to the Church of Happiness is a real giant in society. The lady says that this is Prince Eugene Finir himself, the last heir of the vanished Empire of Servin, and he is one of the highest members of the Church of Happiness. Hearing this, the young gentleman was surprised because he did not know what a strange turn of events would be. Tom asks Madame in surprise if she is sure about this, because as far as he knows, Eugene Finir disappeared after the war with Servin. The woman claims that she personally saw everything with her own eyes, and that he was also introduced to her when she entered the Church of Happiness. Madame says that Mr. Riken also has black hair and red eyes, and he looks so much like Mr. Eugene. The lady says that if he wants, she can introduce him to her because the descent ceremony will begin soon. Luke, surprised, asks if he really wants to meet him right away and thinks it would be safer if they investigated first. However, the gentleman claims that black hair and red eyes are rare, and he may be a member of the royal family of Servin. The secretary reminds that all members of the royal family except him died during the war with John Fursa. Tom suggests that there may still be surviving relatives, or perhaps it is one of his distant relatives on his mother's side. Luke says that if this is his distant relative, then he asks what he is going to do. The gentleman says that they will look, but first he will ask what he wants because he is very interested in what kind of person he is. The secretary realized that his boss always lost his cool when it came to his mother. Luke knows that Tom's real goal is not the restoration of Servin, but revenge on John Furze, especially revenge for his mother. A man with black hair and red eyes claims to be Eugene Finir and then asks if they were looking to meet him. At this time, the young gentleman thought that he did not look like him at all and knew that even at first glance it was clear that this was dyed hair. The man says that judging by their facial expressions they have doubts and then reminds them that many people have doubts at the beginning. The gentleman says that once he shows the power available only to the royal family of Servin, everything will fall into place. Anyone in Purs knows that runic magic is divided into 5 elements: water, wind, fire, earth, and darkness. The runes of darkness are a power available exclusively to members of the royal family of Servin, and then the man asks how much they know about the runes of darkness. The man in the white jacket says that they do not summon pillars of fire or lightning from a clear sky, but they can control the mind memories and feelings of a person. The gentleman says that this is the most powerful force for fighting people, and then announces that the demonstration is over. And the guy with dyed hair asks if they believe him now. Tom thought for a moment, and then turned to his secretary and suggested leaving the office. Luke agreed, but when he found himself behind the door, he thought that somehow this was all suspicious. And at this time the man does not understand what is happening to this person because after contact with the rune of darkness, people usually lose their minds. The man doesn't understand why this gentleman is so calm and it teases him a little. At this time, Tom reflects on the fact that now he understands why this man was believed. The young gentleman says that it is believed that the runes of darkness are available only to the royal family of Servin, but he knows that in fact such abilities are found in others as well. Tom claims that most people like him can only fake rune magic because the people of Penza have never seen real runes, so deception is easy. Hearing this, the man asked in surprise what he was talking about, and at that time the gentleman showed his rune and asked if he felt it. Tom claims that it is difficult for him to even keep his eyes open because the fear seems to be tearing his heart apart. The gentleman says that this is a real rune of darkness, and then says that now it is his turn to ask questions. Tom is interested in what the Church of Happiness is and what the descent ceremony is. At this time, Luke, standing behind the door, thought that his master should control the power. Tom asks why he is pretending to be Eugene and offers to tell him everything he knows. At this time, Miri explains that, for now, this is all they have managed to find out, since the identity of the journalist who wrote the article and the informant from the palace are already known. The emperor says they are both currently absent from the capital. An aide reports that the journalist has completely disappeared, and the finance minister's employee recently took an extended leave. The advisor says they have one thing in common, and that is that they both actively promoted the Church of Happiness. Hearing this, Ryan is surprised and asks if civil servants can change their state religion. The minister says that His Majesty has allowed freedom of religion, and then says that they asked why the man was taking a holiday in the middle of a holiday. The Marquis explains that he said he was holding an important event in the north, and this turned out to be strange because he doesn't understand what kind of organization is organizing overheated holidays on the occasion of the Foundation's day. The gentleman asks in surprise what the Church of Happiness does. Miri explains that according to their data, this is a new religion that emerged several years ago, and they will bring happiness to everyone because they believe in the power of happiness. Clarence, surprised, asks what kind of stupid slogan this is. Miri explains that they have many temples throughout the empire. The secretary says that they are involved in charity and donate money, but the cult of creation clearly does not approve of this. Ryan wonders where they get the money from because he understands that it takes a lot of resources to promote this faith. Luke asks the master if everything went smoothly. Tom thinks so, but then says that when he comes to, he won't remember anything. The secretary apologizes and then says that he only just remembered that he saw the symbol of the Church of Happiness on the badges of several noblemen, and the gentleman asks if there are any results from the interrogation, because when he comes to his senses, Tom will declare a desire to join the Church of Happiness. A man thinks that if he says that he is interested in learning and wants to sacrifice, the reaction will be quick. The secretary asks in surprise what he has in mind, and the gentleman explains that he wants to study this religion more deeply. At this time, the girl put on a soldier's uniform and then said that her name was Clitzia Megerino. The baby says that she used to live in a secluded place called Shumarin, but now she is in the imperial castle. One day, out of the blue, a young lady became the empress of the Penza Empire, and it is because of this that she has to go through hell. The main character thought that after all the events they would finally get divorced, but problems arose within the emperor's family. Miri says she can confirm that the only person who contacted journalists was an official from a department in the Ministry of Finance. The secretary believes that it would be better to postpone the issue of divorce until the investigation is completed and to remain in the castle hiding his identity. At this time, the girl thought that these were difficult words because she was not sure what was happening, but it seemed like they were telling her to stay here and not go anywhere. About a week has passed since then, and the main character was very bored because she couldn't even move from the spot if she wanted to. The emperor told her to remain quiet because his family was busy preparing for the ceremony in honor of the founding of the empire. The gentleman says that after the ceremony, public interest will subside, and therefore believes that there is no point in trying so hard to disguise it. Jan called the girl Sasha, and upon hearing this she said that she had never told him her nickname. The young lady claims that it meant His Highness to those detectives back then, and then remembers that the hair and eye color was different. The emperor says that she quickly realized this and asks her not to tell anyone about what happened then. The girl asks if he forgot anything, and then reminds her that he said that if they meet again, he will buy her meat. Clitzia wonders why she never saw the meat because she was very hungry then and believed him. In a few minutes, the table was set with very tasty meat dishes, and their quantity varied. The maid says that from now on only meat will be served at all meals, and this is an order from His Majesty. At this time, the guards thought that something was being hidden from them, since this was the first time they had such a laid table. The main character thought that she could live in the emperor's family and that it was worth it. The founding of the empire was told in an ancient legend. The great dragon Asha promised to make a covenant with the people. In Purds, the most grandiose festival is held in honor of this, and all the inhabitants of the empire celebrate 10 years ago, after the victory at Servant, this also became a celebration of victory. An imperial ball is being held to which VIPs from all over the continent are invited. They say that the dancing and singing there did not stop for a whole week, and the main character living in remote Shumarin was not particularly affected by this. Many ladies dream of receiving an invitation to the ball, marking the founding of the empire, since not everyone can get there. Klitzia understands that she is from a completely different world and thinks that it would be much more interesting for her to sit in her room and read new editions of the Grand Duke of the North. The girl understands that the imperial family is really busy preparing for their ceremony because she has not seen any of them. Suddenly, the main character saw Amber, who had arrived from the academy with the girls. The young lady understands that the professor has arrived with a group of members from the Northern Academic Society. Klitzia asks in surprise how they ended up in the capital, let alone in the palace. The headmistress says that now is the time for the Northern Academic Community Seminar. The woman says that the new member of the society, Leon, has officially invited them, and thanks to him the seminar will be held at the palace. Ryan reports that he understands that the elder Klitzia is the founder of the community and asks if this is true. The main character asks the gentleman what he is planning because she knows that he doesn't do anything for no reason. Ryan says it seems there was a misunderstanding and he just found out about it now. The gentleman explains that new members are required to attend the seminar, but since he is the head of the guard, he cannot leave the castle and therefore invited them here. The girl says that she has a task and then says that the emperor orders his betrothed to go to the battlefield, where death will surely await her, and asks what he will do. The man says that the correct answer is to stage a coup with the Northern Knights, overthrow the emperor and establish power, and then win the war and offer the position of empress to his betrothed. Hearing this, the young lady was surprised and asked if he was really a member of the community. The girls are surprised to hear that their Klitzia has become an imperial guard and is even friends with the guard commander. The little girl wanted to explain it to them but didn't know how, and Ryan assures her that she is a guardian knight apprentice. The girls say that it is very elite and cool, and the uniform suits her very well, and then they say that they are happy for their friend. Miri says that preparations for the ceremony are complete because all the invited guests have arrived in the country. When the emperor saw Klitzia with the girls, he became interested in who she was with. The secretary says that he heard that this is some kind of community invited by the guard, and it seems that this is the Northern Academic Community. The emperor says that spending time with girls her age is more interesting than living alone in the illegal imperial palace. Miri reports that the order of the ceremony has already been approved, and nothing can be done, and then asks if the emperor doesn't think that revealing the lady's identity is dangerous in a situation where it is unknown what might happen. The gentleman says that while everyone is in their place, he made every effort to ensure that everything went well. The morning of the empire's founding celebration arrived. The main character remembered seeing Aunt Lance 15 years ago. The girl asks how old she really is since she always looks so good. In response, the woman only smiled. Clarence thought that life is unpredictable and the Order of the Red Lion made Klitzia the greatest living weapon. The woman knew that the girl had a long way to go to her happiness, and it was very joyful to see her. The main character was at the party with her friends and they had a really good time, and no one even imagined what would happen that night.